Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
This is VOCM Open Line. Call 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626. The views and opinions of this program are not necessarily those of this station. The biggest conversation in Newfoundland and Labrador starts now. Here's VOCM Open Line host Paddy Daly.
Well, all right, and good morning to you. Thank you very much for tuning into the program. It's Wednesday, July the 3rd. This is Open Line. I'm your host, Paddy Daly, and David Williams. He's produced the program. You'll be speaking with David when you pick up the phone to give us a shout to get in the queue and on the air. Topic up to you. If you're in the St. John's metro region, the number to dial is 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, it's toll-free long distance, 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 86. 26. So for tennis fans, great part of the summer, of course, well into the grass court season, and now at the All England Club in week number 1 at Wimbledon, the third Grand Slam of the year. The top Canadians looking pretty good so far. Denis Shapovalov on the men's side had big upset, beat the 19th seed Nicholas Parry to move on to the second round. I think Felix Auger-Aliassime fell prey to the nighttime curfew that they actually have at the All England Club. On the women's side, Fernandez through, Andreescu through, so pretty great. For tennis fans, if you're interested in having a look at the Billie Jean King Cup, it's on display at the Riverdale Tennis Club today. It's, of course, the championship trophy for the premier women's team event in the world of tennis. So there you go. It was on this date, as a matter of fact, in 1970 that Margaret Court beat Billie Jean King 14-12, 11-9. That was predated where they instituted the tiebreak. So if you're tied at 6 in the first, second, or third, or fourth set in the men's side, or the first and second set in the women's side, first in 1971, they instituted a 13-point tiebreak at Wimbledon. 1975 across the board when the USTA instituted at the US Open. In 2022, they instituted a tiebreak in the final set, which was never the case because we've seen some matches extend over the course of days, but now there's a 10-point tiebreak in the final set. And don't worry about Billie Jean King and her loss to Margaret Court in 1970. King won a record 20 titles at Wimbledon, 6 in singles, 10 in women's doubles, 4 in mixed doubles. She played 51 Grand Slam singles events from 59 to 83, reaching at least the semifinals in 27 and at least the quarters in 40 of her attempts. Of course, she beat Bobby Riggs in the Battle of the Sexes, the first woman in the history of sports to win $100,000 in a single season or single year. So Billie Jean, she did all right. All right, on that front, we spent a lot of days down at Riverdale or at Churchill Park playing baseball. I hear from families all the time talking about the exorbitant cost to put their child in a summer camp, whatever type of camp they're talking about. And of course, people still scrambling for daycare opportunities. So if that's an issue that you'd like to broach, we can do it. Because remember, when we get updates from the government in particular, they always talk about the spaces that have been added. And of course, the grid for the pay rate for early childhood educators. What we don't always understand is how many spaces have been lost. While spaces have been gained, we always need to know the net gains. What do you think? Let's talk about it. Let's talk a little travel. So we know, the WestJet Mechanics flight is now over. It didn't jeopardize any of the flights out of St. John's International, but it did disrupt the travel for thousands of people across the country. And then you talk about the fact that the compensation packages inside the airline passenger protection rights is just so flimsy. And here's an example of the pettiness sometimes in the airline industry. So WestJet owns Sunwing. The Canadian Transportation Agency has about 72,000 cases for compensation in their backlog, and they awarded this particular couple $800 with a 6.5-hour delay, a flight from Cancun to Regina back in 2020. $800. The airlines are allowed to challenge it in a federal court, and on this front, Sunwing is going to. They're going to challenge in federal court an $800 compensation awarded by the Canadian Transportation Agency. It's truly extraordinary. So WestJet will not comment on it. I assume this level of pettiness is to set an example that they will be willing to challenge. And there's all sorts of gray areas available for the airlines to deny you compensation. Matters of safety and maintenance, when in fact we have a big crewing issue continue to plague the industry here in the country, but Sunwing going to go to federal court over $800. So more to challenge the award paid on lawyers and court fees versus just pay the compensation to the couple that was duly awarded it by the Canadian Transportation Agency. Amazing stuff. Okay. Let's keep going. And this is a so-called travel-related issue as well. So, few things. So the country's Governor-General, Mary Simon, she's now been named the Honorary Chief Commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard. So it's obviously an honorary position. There was an investiture ceremony yesterday in St. John's. Few things. So she's also going to be involved in some mental health roundtables. But to kick off the program yesterday, Richard Cashin called to offer his concerns or condemnation of comments coming from the Governor-General at the Memorial Day ceremonies. And we can have your call on Memorial Day and your reflections or your thoughts or questions or concerns. But Mr. Cashin's concern was how the Governor-General opened up her remarks, talking about unceded land that was once belonged to the Mi'kmaq or the Mi'kmaq, and that's a reflection that you hear many, many times opening a variety of ceremonies. What was interesting about that, it kind of struck me too, and I don't pretend to have a real thorough knowledge of the historical attachment with Indigenous peoples and where they were in different parts of the province over the course of centuries, but it spurred an awful lot of feedback via email in particular. What was curious to me is I would click the links, and I spent some time yesterday afternoon trying to figure it out a little bit more because, again, I don't really have a firm grasp on all of the details of some of these historical facts. But almost every single link I clicked had a different account of exactly Beothuk or Mi'kmaq or other Indigenous communities, where they were, when they got her, whether it be the arrival of the basket. So, again, it becomes extremely difficult, for me anyway, to have any of these types of conversations with any sort of authority because every link I clicked had a bit of a different recount or account of exactly what the history entails. So she has been taken to task on it, and whether or not there's going to be any further comment from you and or the Governor-General's office or Government House, I'll leave it up to you. But anything under that front, if you'd like to take it on, we can do it. And talking about the Coast Guard, it was on this date in 1898, a fellow named Joshua Slocum from Nova Scotia became the first person to complete a solo circumnavigation of the Earth, which leads me to issues like if you're going to row a bathtub across the Atlantic, or the semi-submersible tragedy that was the Titan implosion, and whether or not that should bring upon some insurance coverage to cover the liability for the cost of Canadian Coast Guard and search and rescue efforts. Anyway, let's talk about it. Okay, sticking with transportation-ish. So people are finding out about ride sharing, and maybe for the first time ever, unless you're a traveler that uses Uber elsewhere, your first experience with ride sharing may indeed be with Uber arrival. And of course, there's more than Uber operating as a ride sharing opportunity here in the province at this moment. But the traditional taxi industry, they of course and obviously will be worried about a variety of these things, because it has indeed jeopardized some traditional taxi operations and revenue and profit elsewhere in the country. To what extent that'll be the case here, who knows? What people are finding out, sometimes the hard way, of course, the app can be very helpful in knowing how long it's going to be before your ride gets to where you are, what the cost will be with the ride to wherever you're going. But in the world of dynamic pricing or surge pricing, here's just a few examples of what people have found out in the very recent past. So these are Uber rides that were flagged late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, and this is from the downtown core in particular. To get from George Street to Porter's Road out in Paradise, that cab ride, I don't know how much it cost, but the Uber pricing at that moment in time was over $162. Then it was to Ladysmith Drive from George Street, $61. And then it was from, let's see here, Murley Drive from George Street, $60. From World Parkway, which is out by the airport, from George Street, $62.56. So you just have to be aware what you're getting yourself into if you choose ride sharing versus the traditional cab company. All right, and then some concerns that persist regarding the criminal background check for Uber drivers. At this moment in time, they do indeed have to get the criminal background check, but not obliged to get the vulnerable sector check, which all the traditional cab drivers have to get. So on that front, apparently the way the legislation reads is that it's up to the company to require one, and it requires the consent of the driver to get a vulnerable sector check, which for some is a huge gap in the legislation, and I agree. Why wouldn't we oblige them, make it mandatory to have both of those checks? Anyway, let's keep going. So this one is hyper-local, but I think it has a maritime flair, which might be part of the provincial conversation. And I've heard from a ton of people down in Kitty Vitty regarding the slipway. So 9 months later, after they closed it, of course there was some significant damage to it. Well, I don't know if it's significant or extensive, what the right word was, but there was lots of cracks, lots of instability, some rotten splits and what have you. But 9 months later, no real idea whether or not it's actually going to reopen. It is obviously the only way to put boats in the water without the opportunity to use a crane or whatever down in Kitty Vitty. And it's about more than simply having the historical connection between the sea and Kitty Vitty, which has changed dramatically over the course of the last number of years. But residents are worried about whether or not that's ever going to be back in play. And at this moment in time, when many people who might not be seafaring folk, but would like to get out and participate in the recreational food fishery, for instance, then I think there's some questions that the city pretty much owes folks in Kitty Vitty as to whether or not that slipway is ever going to be put back in place. And yes, I would suggest it's part of Kitty Vitty's history. Anyway, I know that's a bit of a hyper-local issue, but let's talk about it. Okay, sticking with the water. On the recreational food fishery, just one more time. I know people tune in, tune out. Sometimes you listen. Maybe some people listen every day. But every single day leading up to the announcement of the dates for the recreational food fishery and thereafter, I get the same question about what the rules are regarding how many fish you can catch. All right. So there are management measures, and then there's policy, and then there's laws. Inside the world of 5 fish per person, 15 per boat. It's not quite as cut and dry as that, and this is directed from DFO. So I'm not trying to mislead anybody. I'm not trying to offer any misinformation. I'm reading directly from what DFO has said regarding how many fish you can catch. Now, we know there's some repeat offenders that will go out, get their 15, come in, offload, go back out, get 15 repeatedly all day long. Here it is. You will not be charged if you exceed the boat limit of 15 fish as long as each person only has their daily quota of 5 fish. However, it is important to remember that DFO has the ability to change or close this fishery if participants are not adhering to the combined set of regulations and management measures. These rules are designed for conservation and safety. So just one more time to put it out there, and hopefully those of you still have that question looming in your mind, you just got your answer right there. I guess the important part there is you won't be charged. But if DFO finds it to be a persistent action by so many people catching more than 15 per boat, then we might potentially, which is ridiculous, but we might potentially see a change in the rules, a firming of the rules, or the closure of the recreational food fishery. But anyway, let's take it on. And the FFAW yesterday, at the 32nd anniversary of the cod moratorium imposition, the largest layoff in Canadian history, they are displeased, to say the least, regarding the lifting of the moratorium to reinstate the commercial cod fishery for a variety of reasons, whether it be the offshore or international fishing. But the real concern that I think I see echoed more than anything else is the use of the draggers. It doesn't just jeopardize how many cod are taken or the damage on the seafloor, but the draggers will take everything in its path. Right? They talk about the substantial and the important crab grounds that may be disturbed, and whether the nets or the draggers are hauling in halibut and flounder and everything else in its wake. So anyway, I think there's going to be people who want to talk about that continually, and we are happy to take it on. All right, a few cookies before we get to you. So good news that the fine folks working on fire suppression in Labrador have got the 2 main fires that have jeopardized Churchill Falls. It's been held at bay, which is terrific news. And of course, we understand the concerns there. It's been since the 19th of June that folks have been evacuated. The evacuation order remains in place. But beyond that, and we also understand now that Labrador City is back on a provincial grid versus having to rely on Hydro-Quebec and their capacity coming from Fairmont. But the folks in Wabush, they have still, I think, completely legitimate concerns about the fact that they're pretty isolated. They were not attached to the grid to the point where if and when the power went out, they were sitting there in the dark. No ability to be powered up by Fairmont. No ability at this moment in time to get power from whether it be the Upper Churchill and or from Muskrat Falls is my understanding. So they still have questions about where they stand about a solid, reliable backup source of power if and when we go through this experience one more time. All right, still lots of education concerns that people should be talking about, in my personal opinion, but I'm having a devil of a time understanding what's going on at Holy Redeemer School. So the province says that the school will not be shuttered, it will be reopened, but they continue to look for the source of this foul odor. So there was some question about whether or not it had any relationship with the nearby gas station. Apparently they've ruled that out. They're going to drill into the gymnasium floor. But it is sort of mind-boggling that after all of this time, where the students had to be dispatched to finish the school year at other facilities close by, is that they can't identify the source of the odor. I'm not condemning the folks from various government departments that are working on it, But sometimes you think that these types of issues may be relatively fundamental. In this case, I guess not. But the province is still committing to having the school reopened. So whether it be that or folks that are concerned with Learysbrook or Larkhall or St. Peter's or PwC or Ken Mount Terrace or anything in the education envelope, you know that I'm more than interested in taking it on. All right, a couple of quickies before we get to you. All right. So I've been asked to put back out, even though I've done this countless times over the course of the last few months, is about the formal appeal that has been filed regarding World Energy GH2, filed by the Environmental Transparency Committee. They're talking about people's health and the environment and a variety of things. So it's a little surprising that the email reads sort of like, we don't think about it, we don't talk about it, we haven't been discussing it or debating, which of course we have, and extensively. And I'll put it back out there for the purpose of that emailer's concern, and hopefully that's satisfactory. And there's lots to talk about inside those projects. All right. So, Ken MacDonald, the current Liberal Member of Parliament for the Liberal Party, is not running again. I don't think there's any big surprise there. He says if he finishes his term, it'll be about 10 years coming back and forth to Ottawa. And like many people, it will be references to spending more time with family, and so be it. I mean, he's talking about watching his grandchildren participate, whether it be in cheerleading or hockey or anything else, and fair enough. I hope someday to have grandchildren, and then I'd like to have some free time to spend time with them. But of course, it's not that long ago that he openly and publicly opposed the increase of the carbon tax, and that was 3 cents on the 1st of April. And we can take that on if you're so inclined. And fair enough, Mr. MacDonald can do whatever he sees fit. There's some thought he might run provincially, but that road is yet to be crossed, and so we'll wait to hear from Mr. MacDonald in the weeks and months to come. In the big scheme of things, whether it be about his support of the Prime Minister, whether there's a leadership review required, whether he should step down, what the future of the party is under the leadership of the Prime Minister, it's a big conversation, and I think that's one that's ongoing probably in a more heated fashion inside the Liberal caucus than prior to their loss in Toronto St. Paul's, a seat they held for some 31 years. Carolyn Bennett, the outgoing member, won it by 24 points in the previous election, and of course the Liberals lost by 3 points this time around, so it's not insignificant. This is not aimed at Mr. MacDonald. This is just a broad stroke. So for some moment in time, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not there was whether or not we had fair and the integrity of the elections were upheld in 2019, 2021. The opportunity for foreign bad actors to influence, to meddle. And of course, the preliminary findings, so says Justice Hogue in her preliminary report, is that it did not impact the outcome. But we can and should be talking about foreign interference in nomination races and in elections, and what we should understand and how we should be wary of, and protections and protocols in place. But then you add in the bloody NSICOP report about so many, who knows how many, members of Parliament may indeed have wittingly or semi-wittingly collaborated with foreign bad actors, which is a huge story. And this is where it's going to get even dicier. So people will say, name the names. When in fact, at this moment in time, I don't think we can, by law, and with our relationship in the intelligence community internationally, just start throwing names out there without any required investigation, which has to happen. It's now in the Commission's hands, and Justice Hogue, who was approved by all parties, hopefully she and her team can get to the bottom of it. But here's what's going to be the case. We are all, I think, prey to rush to judgment. And some of that is based on the grey area and the poor handling of these files in the recent past. And again, this is not aimed at Mr. MacDonald, but people who are going to say they're not running again or step down, and there's been a couple of members step down in the recent past where the immediate reaction is they're on the list, and that's a problem. I mean, people are willing to tar and feather folks who they may indeed view as traitors. Again, not Ken MacDonald. I have no idea whose names are on these lists. But until we get to the bottom of it, and very, very quickly, the pending election, we won't know whether or not people who are on the ballot have been named in this particular report. And let's just tune out the politicians. You know, Elizabeth May, nothing to see here. Jagmeet Singh, very different approach. Mr. Poilievre, of course, can't see it because he refused to get the top security clearance. And the Prime Minister, of course, the office has bungled this one. They had the report since March, said nothing about it. But that's going to be a tag associated with politicians, federal members of Parliament, if and when they don't run or if and when they resign. That's what people are going to think. That's what people are going to say. And I get why. But let's hope that Justice Hogue can maybe even shelve some of the big governmental interference and get down to the brass tacks of this report. It's important. We see what's gone on south of the border regarding election integrity and how that public discourse has become just so brutally toxic. We can't have it here. Doesn't matter who you're going to support. That will be a huge problem for us. While we take our eye off the ball with some of the big public policy issues that must be attended to, must be adhered to, must be debated, if we get into the rabbit hole of these types of issues, the unraveling of democratic institutions, completely unnecessarily so. So those members, and of course, if you're, again, the voice of reason on this front, even though I do suggest we tune out the politicians on this one, is Blanchette, leader of the bloc. Right? He says, I'm going to get my clearance, I'm going to read it. If anyone of my party's on that list, they'll pay the price. Rightfully so. We're on Twitter. We're VOCM Openline. Follow us there. Email address is openline@vocm.com. When we come back, let's have a great show. That topic, entirely up to you. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Let's begin this morning on line number 2. Good morning, Mary Shortle. You're on the air.
Hi, good morning, Patty. Thanks for taking my call.
No problem.
I do want to talk about the Northern Cod decisions and the discussions that have been happening in the last several days. But first, just before I start that, I have to say I was at the Harbour Voices Gala last night with Jacob Collier. I have never experienced that kind of feeling in an audience or momentum in my life. It was absolutely awesome. What a great uplifting distraction from all the other issues that we're dealing with from day to day. It was superb.
I've seen some reviews, and now I regret not going. I know who he is. I mean, he's got 6 Grammys. Apparently, he's an absolute savant and genius on the piano or what have you. But every single review I heard was exactly what you just said. Magic.
Oh, my God. I mean, I'm in one of the choirs, very, very small, little tiny voice in the corner. But the 1,400 voices and the audience participation and the energy and just the positivity, how he speaks about, music being kind of the balancing thing for everybody. It was absolutely, I've never experienced anything before in my life.
Terrific.
It was wonderful, yeah.
Glad to hear it.
But I do want to talk about the serious issue facing fish harvesters in the communities. In fact, all of us, I guess, in Newfoundland and Labrador with the discussion. And I heard your preamble. I agree 100% with you. I've been listening carefully. I listened to Tony Doyle yesterday on your show. Fisheries broadcast, obviously, have been talking a lot about it. Glenn Winslow's been very vocal. Of course, the FFAW and their press conference yesterday. But George Rose, who's one of the fisheries scientists who the fisheries broadcast had on the other day, I think summed it up very appropriately. I mean, I think it's really important that we sign on and support this House of Commons petition that FFAW talked about yesterday. I had a chance to talk with the MP, Lisa Marie Barron, from Nanaimo Ladysmith. She's the one who's presenting the petition to the House of Commons. She's formerly from here in Newfoundland, Labrador, and she said her family had to leave when the moratorium happened because of the impact on her family's business. She didn't say what it was, but she said that's how she ended up in BC. So I think it's an issue very near and dear to her heart. He's very concerned, George Rose, and I concur with that the numbers of the stock haven't actually changed. It's a goalpost with which they measure it. And I heard Tony say that yesterday with you as well. And the broken promise, I guess, of waiting until there's 115,000 metric tons before the offshore and international draggers get involved, I think is very, very significant, because I think it will, in fact, jeopardize the rebuilding. Now, I've been, in the same union as FFAW for a long, long time. I remember when the moratorium happened and we were facilitators for the union. We were involved in helping fish harvesters and fish plant workers go out into the field and sign up their colleagues and coworkers when NCARP and tags and that was happening. And we all saw the despair and the absolute dismay of and the destruction of the communities that happened after the moratorium. And I've watched the fish harvesters over the past 30 years take so much care to try and get that stock back to where it can and hopefully can meet 115,000 metric tons, and then the draggers will be, should be permitted to do what they do. But to have them fish during a pre or drag, as you correctly said, during a pre-spawning and a spawning period in our Grand Banks. I think it will reverse all this hard work that so many people have been involved with. I'm also very, very nervous about it.
Well, there's a lot to this. So there was an old 1982 agreement that the federal government had in place about the first 115,000 tonnes to go to the inshore. It was reiterated back in 2015 by the Prime Minister, and now, of course, with this DFO decision, and it had to be greenlit by the Federal Fisheries Minister, Diane Laboutier, obviously they've just turned their back on it. And, to not learn from history makes us pretty silly stewards. If indeed we know what the dragger gear does, what it looks like, what it drags up in its wake, then how can we repeat sins of the past which led to 32 years of a moratorium to be imposed? And, of course, consequently, the largest layoff in Canadian industrial history. So there's just something cockeyed here. Of course, if you hear from someone like Alberto Wareham, for instance, out of Ice Water Foods, saying there is a need for a balanced blended fishery, okay, but when you trigger technical issues regarding NAFO with lifting a moratorium to reinstate a commercial fishery as opposed to expanding the stewardship fishery, then it just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense at this moment in time. I mean, the precautionary principle makes sense to me. And you mentioned George Rose. He has indeed said, and we know the data modelling, we use the data point from 1983 to 1954, doesn't put any more fish in the water, but at the same time, George Rose, who I think is a noted scientist, and the book that he wrote called Cod is really quite insightful, obviously, is that if northern cod are rebuilding at some stage and are returning to historical migration patterns, there is potentially good news in the offing. And a 5,000 tonne increase to the total allowable catch is not massive, but the implications of stewardship versus commercial are very real. And there's no rational explanation coming from the government that I've heard.
I couldn't agree more with you. In fact, I have a copy of that letter here, and they actually say that they know they have to be diligent and ensure that a resource rebound is real and sustainable. They make reference to how it actually supports communities, the coastal communities of our province, the inshore harvesters, also fish plant workers. All of those are in jeopardy right now, just like they were, 3 decades ago. And I haven't heard, I heard Ken McDonald a little bit this morning talk about it when he was talking about not reoffering, but I haven't heard the MPs in this province saying anything. And I think that's quite disappointing. Not just for the people who are employed by the inshore fishery, but for all of us in Newfoundland and Labrador. I think this is genuinely something that each and every one of us should be very concerned about. And we were concerned. We saw it in 1992, and we should have learned something about a whole bunch of stuff, transitioning and retraining. I saw people who were fishing their whole entire lives feeling embarrassed and devalued and terrified about having to go back to school to do something that they knew nothing about. This is like, and I think George may have said this. He said, it's culturally and economically significant to our province. So it's not just the economics, but it's the coastal communities being sustained. It's our people, especially in the professional fish harvesters, who want to feel that they have, a career that they can be proud of, that they've worked hard for, that they've actually sacrificed for in order to maintain the levels even that we have today, right? So I think this petition is really, really important. It's supposed to be up on the website today or tomorrow, I think. It's E5057, and it asks for return to the stewardship fishery, as you said, and to also reaffirm the promise of the 115,000 megaton commitment. But I just go a little step further and ask the province's MPs to please get on side with this and please be vocal about this, because this really could impact the future of our province. It's
our 6 Liberal members have applauded this. They call it historic.
Yes, I heard Ken this morning, saying it's great, we got the commercial fishery back again, and the union is just being the union. But I don't believe that for 1 minute. I think that the concern is coming from the members up to their leadership, and they're begging to get some support for this. And the NDP is on board federally. That this petition will be is really important. But we're hearing professionals and scientists and members of the general public being very concerned about this, and the voice that's missing the most is our MPs.
the union was already ginned up, and the way they're reacting to this is very predictable, and that's not a slight or an applause. That's just the facts of the matter, and that just stems back to redfish. The way that the redfish was allocated to the offshore was really a problem for the union. Now, given this decision, it just adds on or piles onto their already I think, legitimate frustration here, because even in the redfish, some of the offshore quota was going to entities that weren't even prepared to fish it. They didn't have the capacity, the people and or the infrastructure to even fish the redfish, but yet they got a significant portion of the quota or the total allowable catch. So it's just a strange state of affairs. I appreciate the time this morning, Mary. Anything else quick before I have to go?
No, I was just going to say, when you said that, it would make you wonder why these decisions are really made, right? And I mean, that's a cynic in all of us, I guess. But you know, that it just doesn't make sense. I remember the redfish one as well, and I heard Greg say yesterday, you know, we weren't surprised because you have to expect something other than that to be surprised because of what their history has shown with redfish and other species. So, thanks, Patty, for making time. It's a really important discussion, and I hope it keeps up, and I hope people sign on to the House of Commons website and sign on to that petition E5057.
Appreciate it, Mary. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And, you know, look, and again, there are absolutely people from the province working offshore in the fishery, which leads to some comments we've heard from others about, you know, how can you serve multiple masters on this front? Whether you be a union representing inshore harvesters, people working offshore, plant workers. So it's a mixed bag. I don't even know how they maintain that particular juggling act and or balance, because everybody has a different need or want when it comes to arguments or discussions regarding whether it be redfish or northern cod or anything else. Let's take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2. Good morning, George Maswell. You're on the air. George? Dave, do we have George on 2 potted up?
No, I'm here.
Patty. Good morning, sir.
How are you?
Doing great. How about you?
I'm very well, thanks.
Good man.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
If you have us on speaker, can you pick up the receiver so we can hear you a little clearer, George?
Sorry, it's my first time, Patty.
No worries. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. I have to say I agree with your previous caller there about Jacob last night. I was at that show too. Wow. Really spectacular.
That's all I've heard. And man, sometimes I kick myself when I miss shows, and that's when I'll be kicking myself because the reviews are out of this world.
Well, I'm pretty sure he's going to be coming back. I think he had a great time.
Terrific. Good to hear.
Yeah.
And of course, you're in the business yourself as a member of the Rowdy Men. Yourself, Greg Hocko, and my buddy Jerry Finn.
Yes, that's right. And I think you got a T-shirt you can sport around.
I sure do have the T-shirt. Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk to you. I was listening in yesterday, and I heard Ruth Lawrence come on, and I thought, hey, why don't I come on and talk about something exciting happening for us today? So Greg and Jerry are going to come home finally, and we're going to do an Arts and Culture Center tour this fall, and that goes on sale today. So I thought I'd call in.
So, I mean, I said my buddy Jerry Finn. You and I have maybe met once, but certainly don't know you very well. But Greg Hocko, also a friend of mine. And, you know, between Jerry's background, playing with bands like the Killer Dwarfs, who I did an intro for down at Fred's Records one night. He played with Burton Cummings when he was here on tour. He played at Iceberg Alley. Jerry was part of the band that time. He's played with David Usher. And, of course, Greg is really quite something with his musical background, whether it be as a conductor or a percussionist or what have you. So the band is mighty.
Well, yeah, you're talking to the weak link here.
No, didn't mean to imply that.
No, I didn't think you did. No. That was just my little joke. No, they're great and they're amazing. And you know, Greg and I met doing Come From Away in Toronto and bonded pretty quickly. And the two of us said right away, before it even opened for the first time there, we said, people are going to be discovering Newfoundland. People are going to be learning about Newfoundland, and they're going to want more. So we should put something together. And he said to me, we got to get Jerry Finn. And I said, who's Jerry Finn? And then this guy showed up at my place, and we became a band. And then, you know, the pandemic started, and we had only played one show, so we just went into rehearsal. We rehearsed for like a year and wrote and recorded and all that stuff. So we came out of the pandemic ready to roll, and we've been touring around Ontario and various in the Maritimes, playing for the diaspora and for new devotees. And we're really thrilled to come home. I'm thrilled to get Jerry and Greg home.
So inside presenting the province through music, of course, the incorporation of stories and then the blend with the so-called old-timey Newfoundland and Labrador music with more contemporary tunes, it's a blend that I think leads to people actually getting a real well-rounded experience of what the province sounds like, what the province feels like. Because when you hit the stage and you blister off a set of Irish music and talk about the province as a tourist destination or the cultural hub that it is, it's not the same thing.
No, it's not exactly the same, and we can't be the same as a lot of great Newfoundland bands, my favorite bands. But because, well, first of all, I'm not from here, right? So I'm proud to tell the stories because I've adopted the place and it's embraced me, and that's sort of my mission in life now is to, and through my tour company that I started too, is to be. I'm a Newfoundlangelist. I'm an evangelist about Newfoundland, and Greg and Jerry have really helped me do that. And I'm like you say, Greg's an incredible classical musician with his own orchestra in Toronto, and composer for all your favorite TV shows. And Jerry's, these guys are both brilliant musicians. I'm thrilled to be with them, and I'm thrilled to be bringing them home to play this music.
And you say you're doing the Arts and Culture Centre tour, so is that hitting all of them across the province?
Yeah, that's right. We're going to be starting in Lab West on October 30th, and we're in St. John's November 1st. And then the rest in short succession thereafter, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. And, it goes on sale today, I'm told, so thought I'd get it out there.
Absolutely, and I'm going to recommend people check it out. We do try to be promoters of the arts here on the program because it is part of not only the fabric, as people say, of the province, but it's part of the economy. And local doesn't mean less than. Local means exquisite and top quality and very professional. So let's get people out to put bums in the seats for the Rowdy Men. I don't know if you mentioned Come From Away, but when I see your name, Come From Away comes to mind because you were part of the Toronto production. And of course, last summer it went off gangbusters at the Arts and Culture Centre in Gander, and I think it's coming back this summer, at least I hope so. They sold out every single seat to every single show. What was the Come From Away experience like in Toronto? I actually saw it at the Phoenix Theatre in London, which was a fascinating experience as a Newfoundlander, sitting there with that kind of pride, and I have to admit, a little bit of blubbering went with it. But what was the Toronto experience like?
Well, there was a lot of blubbering, Patty, from on both sides, on stage and off stage, always. And it was really just a great experience from top to tail. Like, it was great. We were able to tell these stories. My connection with Newfoundland had already begun, so for me, it had another level. And when Newfoundlanders would come to the show, I get Newfoundlanders telling me today, we were there. We were the ones waving the flag. And I'm like, you know what? We would look out and we'd see a sea of flags. And people were leaping to their feet every time. And everybody's sharing their 9/11 stories with you. And, we would invite Newfoundlanders backstage for a cocktail whenever they would come and identify themselves, for sure. It was terrific to share it with the rest of Canada who know very little about this place. And that was my experience growing up. I didn't know much about this place when I got here, and now all I can do is I'm a sponge for it. So it was great in that sense to let the rest of Canada know what is here, what really is here, what the heart of this place is.
George, where are you from?
I grew up in St. Catharines in Niagara region in southern Ontario, and I lived in Toronto for 30 years. And I came here, Cheryl Hickman brought me here, and Jonathan Monroe to work for the Opera Company in 2016 to do Sweeney Todd. And I met a gal named Deneen Conley, and she kept me coming back. So here I am.
Terrific. Yeah, my wife's from Ontario too. And she and her friends admit, and many people that I've met across the country from other parts of Canada, really thought that we were some sort of backwater. Didn't realize that we had a big cosmopolitan setting here in St. John's and surrounding area. And, of course, the absolutely rich history of the province. So I'm glad people are willing and wanting to open people's eyes as to who we really are, where we come from, what we're all about, because there's a lot of misunderstanding. I mean, just given the geography of Canada, of course, people can't be intimately familiar with the Ukrainian experience in Manitoba or the Atlantic Canadian provinces and what they actually look like, as opposed to focusing in on the 401 and everything that they pretend they are. George, good to have you on the show. Who'd you play in Come From Away?
I played Claude Elliott, the Mayor Gander.
There you go. Pretty prominent role. Of course, Derm Flynn was featured pretty famously.
I also played Derm. I played all the mayors.
Oh, okay. Cool. It's nice to have you on the show. So break a leg with the Arts and Culture Centre tour. The tickets are on sale today, hitting all of the centres right across the province, starting off in Lab West. What's the date, October?
October 30th, Lab West, November 1st, St. John's.
Terrific stuff. Nice to meet you this morning, George.
Thanks, Paddy. Look forward to talking to you again.
My pleasure. Take good care.
Cheers. Bye.
Right, bye-bye.
Bye.
George Maswell, remember the Rowdy Men? Of course, they're hitting the road, and take it from me. And of course, I don't really know George very well, but of course, if you're getting to hit the stage at the Royal Alexandra Theatre in Toronto, which is a fabulous room to either experience a play or a production, and of course to perform. But Greg Hocko, I mean, he is something else. And I know Jerry Finn pretty good, and he can really slice it up as a guitar player. He can really beat that axe pretty good. And Hocko, whether it be as a conductor, like he's a conductor for an orchestra, a percussionist. And like you say, he's a composer for a variety of TV shows, and that list is long. So the Rowdy Men on tour. Love it. Let's take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go. Let's go to line number 5. Peter, you're on the air. Good morning, Peter. Hello. You're on the air.
Yes, good morning, Paddy. Sorry about that. Just wanted to speak about the announcement, the end of the northern card closure on the northeast coast. And, that's good news. But the way they opened it, such a small amount, and, the part about draggers and stuff like that going back in there so soon. They talked about 115 tons, 115,000 ton, and I don't know, Paddy, I don't know how this gets done. I don't know how it gets past people like the FFAW. Now it's only 18,000 ton. So, I'd just like to say this. If you want an example of something being destroyed for the second time, go to 3PS. And they did exactly the same as they did before. A very small quota. But, the larger vessels like OCI, they said they had a quota, but really they had a percentage of the quota, but really they had 4 months fishing, November, December, January, February. They had a period of time fishing that same area, and the amount of stuff that was taken, the amount of stuff that was destroyed, and now they'll do the same thing on the northeast coast. And other fishers, when the moratorium was over, like international, I should say, international, they got rights too. But like OCI and Icewater having rights doesn't make it right. The damage, destruction, the ocean floor, when those boats are working to get their quota, is unreal. You'll put a dozen dozers in a ball field and let them go back and forth there for 4 months. There'll be decades before fish return there, even if the fish is in the area. And this don't make it right. And for the call for a moratorium to cease, Greg Pretty, I don't know where he came up with that to reverse the moratorium. Well, we're going to have a moratorium opening sometime in point in life. So if it opens in 10 years' time, when the moratorium is over, well, the same thing is going to happen all over again. And so that's not solving the problems. I can't get by it for the like of me. I can't get by a federal fishery minister to do the same. And we know what's going to happen. When that gets to 100,000 ton, not 300,000, 100,000 ton, they'll be dragging through the ice again. They don't care how small their quota is right now, Icewater and Ocean Choice, because they just got their foot in the door, and now they're in, now they're back. So you keep increasing the quota, and they're going to get a bigger share all the time. And the bigger share, there's more destruction.
I think I know where the union is coming from on this front, because just the concept of you're expanding the total allowable catch by just 5,000 tons. Now, some people will say, we're moving too quick, too fast. I don't know. But 5,000 metric tons from 13 to 18. But to just trigger the commercial fishery versus just add 5,000 tonnes to the stewardship fishery, because you're probably right. At some point in the future, there was going to be reinstatement of the commercial fishery, but I would have thought, personally, that would have come with a much bigger expansion of the TAC as opposed to just adding 5,000 tonnes. So it seems to me that they could have kept it exactly where it was with the strict regulations of the stewardship fishery and then wait to see what further recovery looks like. Because there's lots of different things that have to be, attached to recovery plans. So I'm a little surprised this was the move by the federal government. And I'm not sure that any of their explanations as to why this is a good idea really resonate with me. But of course, I'm not a fish harvester, so I'll leave it up to the experts.
Well, Paddy, I think you got it in perspective, more so than those people who run it have. If you want to talk about from 15 to 18, well, it went in an index fishery in 3 PAs, went from 10 to 13, and then they were in. And then it just kept increasing there a bit somewhat. And then fish harvesters home now are in 3 PAs, our area. They're down from 30,000 pounds down to 4,000 pounds. And, but they still got their 4 months fishing in the gullies and St. Pierre Bank. So if you can make sense out of that, I can't make no sense. And I still say that the union knew about it. How could fish harvesters know about it? Legitimate fish harvesters know about this, and the FFAW not know about it. I think there got to be a change at the top, Paddy, and a change that's not afraid to take on the government, because this is the only way this is going to be fixed for the Northeast Coast is at the White Hills. And if that takes a month or whatever it takes, that's the only way it's going to be reversed. It's not going to be reversed by getting in the media and pointing your finger. And it's not going to be reversed by listening to me this morning. But I know what need to be done. At least I know what need to be done. And they got a chance now to make changes down there. Vote in somebody that's not endorsed by the FFAW. And everybody got a chance to vote that person in. And that person is, like I say again, and I've said before, is Don Street and Glenn Winslow. I say give them a chance. Give them 3 years. If not, give them the boot. You can't be there full time. You just can't go in there as a president and say, I got a lifetime job here. I'm going to retire here. And that's what's been happening. You'd be sliding people in under the door who they want. And, people got a chance to make it better. I hope he takes advantage of it. Anyway, Paddy, I don't accept what Greg Pretty is saying. And I don't think that's the answer. I really don't think that's the answer. You can't have an end to a moratorium and then go ask for another moratorium, because when it opens up, the moratorium is over, whether it's 5, 10, 20 years' time, the same problem is going to be there. So you either fix it now or just let it go, and the same thing will happen.
I know they want to turn back the clock here, but at some point we also have to understand that if, let's just say, the minister responsible just reverses this decision and says, okay, let's just go back to a stewardship fishery. At that point, then the government is operating completely in bad faith, because once there's been a quota extended to Indigenous communities and 3% to Nunavut of it, and offshore, and the NAFO issue that kicked in, then, of course, to reverse these types of decisions, it might suit the FFAW, but then it will absolutely be a demonstration of complete and utter bad faith. So I don't think we're going to put this toothpaste back in the tube, but we still don't really have a good understanding as to why they made this decision. That's from my own perspective.
Well, I know people got to get work and stuff like that, but how they had because of what they're standing for now with those draggers, they're out of work for a long time. 1992 on the Northeast Coast, it was closed down. It was like D-Day. In 1993, they closed 3 PS. And, and that was like D-Day. So if they want to go back to that, 5 years is only a short time, and I figure within 5 years they'll be back there. Same as 3 PS is now, with 4,000 pounds. Not 30, not 40, 4,000 pounds. So, And if you make it go over that £4,000, you really don't need to be fishing.
Fair enough, but when you look at the allocation, this does add very, very little to the inshore enterprises with this expansion of the Northern Cod. Appreciate the time, Peter. Anything else before I have to go?
Well, I figured they should have opened it up for a minimum of 25,000 ton, and an inshore, if that's indigenous, or if it's whoever it is inshore, be entitled to it. And let's see what's happening here before they goes out and start destroying everything in its path again. That's what I'd say. Let's see what's happening first. That's what the minister could do. But don't. If the moratorium is over, in my opinion, as a fish harvester, it's over. But deal with the problem. Thanks, Paddy.
Appreciate the time, Peter. Take care.
All the best.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, let's get another one before we get to the news. Let's go to line number 4. Jackie, you're on the air. Hello, Jackie. Line number 4, you're on the air. This seems to be a pretty regular occurrence here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now. Go ahead.
Okay. Patty, thank you, because I was on the air with you a week ago about my art show for remembrance at the Legion at Black Marsh Road. And today is the last day from 12:30 to 6. And we had a lot of people go through. I'm very thankful for the ones that came. And while I'm at it, I'd like to thank the Legion for having me and Art Tunnell for a travel grant that allowed me to come out here. And for my husband, who is my gopher. He's the guy that does all the carrying and all the driving, and without him, I definitely would not be here. But the show was really, it's gone really well. There's a remembrance blanket for the regiment. There's a blanket for the Korean War. The peacekeepers are covered. Afghanistan is covered. So it covers almost 100 years that we have been from, the 100 years since the epitaph has been in place. So it's a nice show, and this most likely will be the last time that it comes to St. John. So if anybody wants to see it, today will be the last day. And I'm going to add one last thing, and that I am extremely pleased and honored on how the Premier handled the events, and it was so good to see him. We came in a day early to go to the Unknown Soldier, and when we were coming out, there was the way that the light was, you couldn't see who was standing there, and there was a gentleman standing there, and he took your hand and he thanked you for coming, and when you looked up, it was the Premier. So it was just so very nice.
Well, regardless of what people think of all the different components of the repatriation, they certainly put a lot of effort in, and that's everyone involved, whether it be Frank Sullivan or Gary Brown or the War Graves Commission or the Premier or Steve Crocker or whoever else. Whoever was involved, it certainly came out right. And I know people are going to inject some politics into this, which is just nature of the beast, but the day itself, on Memorial Day, was, I thought, fantastic. I thought it was very moving and poignant and solemn and beautiful all at the same time. So I thought it was great.
I agree with you there.
Jackie, good to have you on the show.
So if anybody's around, they can come see my show, and I'll be there till 6.
And where is it? Remind folks.
It's at the Royal Canadian Legion, Black Marsh Road, and there's lots of parking. So there's no trouble getting a parking space. And just come, and maybe you'll get to sew on a forget-me-not, because I have one rug left, and people have been sewing on the forget-me-nots for me.
Sounds great. Thanks for this, Jackie.
Okay.
Good luck.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, Suzanne's here to talk about the CRA. Okay, don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 1. Suzanne, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you?
Doing okay. How about you?
Good. Thank you very much. So I had called in probably a couple months ago back in the spring regarding audits, pre-assessment, post-assessment reviews, and the CRA, and I just wanted to call in again with some updates on a system that I think is extremely flawed, inefficient, and is causing major financial duress for taxpayers. So just to recap quickly, pre-assessment and post-assessment reviews are very common when people file their taxes if they're claiming expenses to either lower tax payable or increase a refund or both. There's always a chance that a taxpayer can get a review letter. Very common and, of course, understandable. My issue is that, it seems since COVID to me, I mean, for years these review letters have been around, but it seems to me that since COVID, they have just been coming out in abundance. It seems like every second return I file is being hung up in process. So the issue for me is that that's fine. If you want to review the return, send out the letter. Let's get it taken care of so that the taxpayer can get assessed, they can get their notice of assessment, they can have their benefits calculated, but that's not what's happening. So, for example, returns I filed in March are still hung up in process. The taxpayer still doesn't have a review letter. So what's happening is, until that return is assessed, they're not going to be calculated for any benefits. So this month, you're going to have tens of thousands of taxpayers with no child tax benefits, no GST. They're not getting their carbon rebates. There's no benefits being calculated until that return is assessed. So it's a system. I mean, taxpayers, families are depending on these benefits to live. When I have emails from clients saying, I still don't have a letter, it's been 3 months, as I tell them, I can only go as fast as CRA goes. It used to be on a review letter, I was able to call in and speak to the pre-assessment or post-assessment review division. And don't get me wrong, I will state that when I do speak to CRA representatives in every single department, whether it be collections, compliance, business, they are very, very helpful. They work with me very well. They're very cooperative, and they do want to help. I have to say that. So I don't think it's the issue of the CRA agent not wanting to help. That's not the issue. It's, from what I'm getting from staff there, they're backlogged, they're short-staffed. I don't know what's going on. I can't say for sure. But I do know that something needs to be done so that if they are going to have a system where they are reviewing every second return that's filed, then send out the review letter immediately. Let their representative be able to take care of this so that the return can get assessed and the taxpayer can get their benefits calculated. It's just not an efficient, logical system when you have taxpayers waiting for months and months and months just to get the letter. Then once they get the letter, I have everything prepared for submission because I can't submit it until we have a reference number and that letter because I don't know what they're being reviewed for. It could be medical expenses. It could be business expenses, union dues. They get reviewed for, a number of different things. But once I submit it, then we're waiting another 6 to 9 months, if we're lucky, before they've finalized, accepted the documents. So anybody who has a review letter could be a year or more before this current file is assessed and finalized. So although they filed on time, it's showing into the CRA system, to the benefits department, that they're not filed yet because the return is still hung up in process. The other issue for me is that I'm finding this past year that I'm submitting documents for review. I mean, I don't enter anything on a return for anybody unless they have a supporting document. I submit the documents. I submit it the way they want it, and they're sending it back saying, we're not accepting these documents, and no reason. For example, a taxpayer that I had last year who's since passed away, I appealed 4 times for his medical expenses to be accepted. He had all supporting documents. He had a letter from an oncologist, from his employer. He had all the I's dotted and T's crossed. I appealed 4 times. I finally got a letter back again in March stating that the decision remains the same. They don't have enough proof to show that he had this medical condition. Patty, this letter they sent was addressed to the estate of. So I called in and I said, okay, so you see that this taxpayer is deceased because the letter is addressed to the estate of. How do you not have proof that this taxpayer has a medical condition? Everything is there. I mean, it's just, I've had reviews where people have been reviewed for 2022. The documents were sent in. They were submitted. This year, they're being reviewed again for 2022 and 2023, 2 years, for the same expenses. I mean, it's just, and it's overwhelming as a tax specialist to try to address actual work when I have hundreds of reviews coming in a month. They give you 30 days. The taxpayer wants it in right away. It's not possible when you have hundreds of those come in a month. Some of these reviews for business expenses are thousands of pages long once you scan and prepare all the receipts and put it in the right category, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very, very flawed, inefficient system. I've written letter after letter about requesting policy review and change. I mean, I can see requesting supporting documents, but just assess the return, do a post-assessment review, and at least allow families to be able to get their benefits and their return assessed on time. I don't know what to do or who to go to at this point. And the other thing is that I'm getting clients come to me who have been filed elsewhere, but they're being charged for audit assistance, $75 to $150 an hour, and there's nobody can afford that. So you have all of these taxpayers outside of my clientele, which is not big, but they're being filed elsewhere. They don't know how to address a review letter. They're in the dark, like many taxpayers are. And so now they're coming to me because the place they filed at are going to charge them $75 to $150 an hour audit assistance. I mean, it's just a crazy system.
Well, the tax code is onerous and far too complicated anyway. I mean, there's something to be said for the fact that government should be able to do my taxes for me. I mean, they've got all the information
required.
Norway. Yeah, I mean, it happens elsewhere. So what we've done here is we've had a tax code, and then there's different policies or shifts or different tax credits or whatever, and then all of a sudden we just pile on to a tax code as opposed to simplify it when things change. It's just a crazy way that the tax code is written and the crazy way that these issues are being broached. I mean, I'm guessing that at CRA, the software automatically triggers some of these reviews just based on red flags that they've got built into their system, as opposed to someone having an actual human look at, okay, here's the supporting document, the assessment is now going to be sent out as opposed to a review letter. So we've got ourselves into a place where the digital world is here, and it's here to stay, of course, and for many reasons it's rightfully so. But when we've got algorithms built in to red flag every single thing, regardless if there's supporting documentation in place, then we've got ourselves a problem.
Well, the other thing, too, that what I see, there's a very large percent of these reviews that are, I mean, they're not people they should be looking at. You know, when I see hundreds of senior citizens in long-term care with dementia being reviewed for medical expenses, I mean, there's something very wrong with the system. You know, it's very easy to have a system built into CRA where they look at an age. Okay, this person is 90. Oh, the address shows long-term care. Chances are this person is going to have high medical expenses. You know, that's common sense. But what I'm seeing is senior citizens being reviewed for medical expenses on a regular basis, people that are supplementing their income, side jobs, skip the dishes or Sensi, or, you know, they may have brought in $3,000-$4,000. So they claim their telephone and internet against it. I mean, my God, we're not going after people that are claiming hundreds of thousands of dollars in expenses. It's just a really, really inefficient out-to-lunch system, and something needs to change. Because as I said, you're going to get an abundance of calls this month. There are going to be tens of thousands across Canada, taxpayers who are not getting their child tax benefits this month because their returns are still not assessed. And they've been filed since March, April, before the deadline. If somebody's filed by the 30th of April on time, this should not be happening.
Yeah, it's a head scratcher. I mean, it's already difficult enough come tax time, whether it be with some of the worries people have with offsetting, and now we know CRA is actually coming after people regarding legal matters, regarding trying to recover some $9 billion in overpayments regarding pandemic support. So there's a lot to it. And then we've had a story last year where whether it be people just didn't have the required training to answer questions from the tax-paying public and being given bad information, consequently maybe putting themselves in hot water with CRA. Unbeknownst to them, they were told what they should do. They did it, and then all of a sudden they find themselves up against it. Right. So there's a multitude of issues. Anything else quickly, Suzanne, before I have to go?
Nope, that's everything. Thank you very much again for your time, and have a great day.
Same to you. Thanks, Suzanne. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, let's go and take a break. When we come back, Patrick's there to talk about the unknown soldier. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Let's go to line number 3. Patrick, you're on the air.
Hi, Patty. I'm not sure if you received the message I left with, I believe it was Greg Murphy. Anyway, it was regarding the unknown soldier, and there was debate. I mean, for me, it was when it first started in France, and I was questioning myself for days and days until the soldier was in the Confederation building, to pay your respects and that. And then I'm finally seeing it in Newfoundland people to the same thing as what I'd been thinking for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Why the hell? But I knew the answer. But why hadn't someone put the application in for this to be, allowed? But we all know the reason why he was draped in the Canadian flag, not flag of Newfoundland relative to that time that we were a Dominion of Britain. And if they don't know the answer by now, check your website. You did post on what the reason and the answer for the flag was.
It's pretty clear.
What I left with Greg on Monday after the repatriation ceremony, or the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier ceremony, I left with him, and I wanted an answer to who in Newfoundland submitted this request, because the same thing could have been done for the flag, in my opinion, and should have been done for the flag.
What request are you talking about, Patrick? I'm a little bit lost here.
Anyway, the request that I put in, I wanted to get a name from Greg, but anyway, a request was sent from Newfoundland and Labrador to the Department of Defense, and it was granted by the Department of Defense. Besides the flag, it is not only the flag that's an issue with Canadian forces. The Canadian forces is also not allowed to salute to Newfoundland.
Okay, just hold on a second.
Just hold.
But I don't know what you're talking about with what you left with Greg. So what was the request that you're talking about before we get to the old issue? Request what?
What I was asking Greg is to pass on to you or David to look up who made that request to the Department of Defense.
Well, I mean, this story is as old as 1920, when then Padre of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, Thomas Nangle, started this issue, and of course was largely responsible for the National War Memorial. Then when Frank Sullivan went to the Premier a couple of years ago, he's a long-time Navy veteran, asking for funding to, spruce up the memorial and for the repatriation to be undertaken, the province sent it through via the Royal Canadian Legion to the Department of Defence, and most importantly, to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which is solely responsible for this type of effort. So that's how that worked.
Oh, no, I'm not asking how that works. I know how that works.
Well, then what are you asking? Let's try to get to that part.
What I'm asking is, Canadian soldiers are not allowed to bury a soldier, and any soldier that died, especially ones with no known grave, are now considered, because when we joined Confederation, they're considered Canadian soldiers.
Right.
So therefore they are buried with a Canadian flag.
Exactly.
But besides that, Canadian soldiers do not salute the odes or anthems of other countries or dominions.
Right. There was a special request made for an exemption so that the soldiers on site could indeed salute the ode to Newfoundland. Yes.
By someone here in Newfoundland, and that's what I wanted to know so we can congratulate that person. Who was that person? Is it a Legion member? Who was responsible for that application to the Department of Defense to make that change?
I don't know specifically which person, but I think it came in from the Royal Canadian Legion itself. So whether that be Mr. Sullivan or Gary Brown or whoever, I don't know who.
That's what we're thinking, but we don't know definite. That's the speculation and assumption by us. By myself and others on his history buffs. That's our speculation as well. We're thinking it was either Gary Brown, the historian, or some of the Legion executives. But we don't know that, or no one has confirmed that to us. But anyway, the thing is, why couldn't the same applications be made to? Was it because it wouldn't get approved? We're embarrassing Canada, because if you watched Trudeau at that event, and it was shameful. Premier Fury, I think, done an amazing job. I really, really respect the way he handled it, the speech, the way it was done. Great, excellent job, Mr. Fury. For when Trudeau got up, and I even heard it on these history buff sites, the first thing Trudeau says is da-da-da, and then he said, well, and he don't say fought for the Dominion or fought for Newfoundlanders. He comes right out and he says fought for the rights of Canadians. We were Canadian, my friend. He didn't fight for Canada. So, it's like it's a political thing with them, and having the flag on it was an embarrassment of Canada. If we removed the Canadian flag, it was kind of like they wanted to take credit, if you can say that word. I don't know if that's the appropriate word, but wanted to take credit for the fighting of the soldiers in the years ago, which is disrespectful.
Well, okay.
That's the issue we have with it. It's the disrespect by Canada because that's disrespectful. They didn't fight for you. They fought for the freedom of Newfoundlanders.
Well,
anyway,
not really sure about that either. But I mean, the Canadian flag was the only flag that was ever going to be on that casket, because, and this is a very concise comment coming from someone who knows, unknown soldiers are deemed to be still in service when Newfoundland Labrador joined Canada. All military units of personnel converted to the Canadian Armed Forces. So he remains in service under the national flag of Canada. One country cannot bury a soldier under another country's colours. So it's as fundamental as that.
Exactly, and the same with the ode. You cannot salute the ode. Changes were made. Patty, if change can be made on one, it can be made on the other, my buddy. And don't argue me that it can't. We'll be with the experts on the site. It's well above you. Anyway, another one. Patty, did you get the other message?
No, I didn't. I didn't get any of them.
We want to know, was this Canadian soldiers, or was this RNC members who were, and was there a death threat received on someone like the the Prime Minister of Canada, or who? But what agency provided these people, and was it because of a death threat, or what the reasoning was for snipers on the roofs of 4 buildings downtown during this ceremony?
Well, I know the Prime Minister's security team has grown exponentially over the years. I don't know if there was a specific threat. There was certainly no mention of it. And I'm not really sure why there's any contentious back and forth here, because the Canadian flag, that was just the technical responsibility of the issue itself. And who's responsible for all this? The Prime Minister plays no role other than being present. The commission, the Wargraves Commission, is absolutely the entity involved with the archaeological dig, the identification of the remains, the association with the Royal Newfoundland Regiment versus fighting for anybody else. So I'm not sure what else to add to this.
Oh, no. Anyway, I'd like an answer, if you could, as to who provided, was this the Prime Minister of Canada's security staff or RNC members, or who or who you know, and if it's just regular security now, because he has more security in the last 6 months and years than premiers have had in a long while, prime ministers rather. So maybe this was just his regular security detail. I don't know, but anyway, I'd like an answer if it was his security detail or RNC, or if it was RNC snipers. But anyway, I personally, when I was there, counted 8 different snipers. 4 different locations, two in each location.
Yeah, and I don't know, but I do know the Prime Minister's security detail is primarily the RCMP, and it is a large one.
Okay, so the RCMP. Yeah, because they didn't look like Canadian soldiers to me, but like I said, they're up on a rooftop, and I didn't have binoculars or nothing with me, so I couldn't tell, you know, what uniforms they were wearing. But yes, they possibly were RCMP.
Yeah, because when I've been in rooms where the Prime Minister was going to be there, and for instance, when we've had leaders like that come to, for instance, when I was working on Out of the Fog of Rogers, we had to get clearance from the RCMP to be allowed in the building when the Prime Minister was there. So I'm pretty confident in saying that's the RCMP. The local law enforcement would provide additional supplemental support, but the Prime Minister's detail travels equal.
Because I was there fairly early. But I know there was questions the night before. Well, okay, like the steps out in front of the crow's nest. I'm trying to think of the name of it for a minute, Patty. But like the steps, we didn't even think that we would be able to get that close. We figured, okay, viewing area down in the Harbour Park. Those areas where they have a screen set up that you can watch it on even. We didn't know because of this, because of security and what you just mentioned, you know, areas he's in, you got to get special permission to open those buildings up to the public, etc. when he's coming. We didn't know how close actually you'd be able to get, and thank God you know, you were able to get fairly close to the actual ceremony that was going on. So I commend whoever worked with the RCMP and security on that issue. That if they did have concerns, you know, it didn't keep people from getting close, from being able to, as I heard a grandkid on one of the broadcasts of one of the soldiers who did not return pension, he said, it's bringing our own home, and he represents not just himself, but all soldiers with an unknown grave.
Right. Last one before I have to go. So apparently I'm being told by someone who I believe does know, is even prior to the Prime Minister committing to being here on the 1st of July, the snipers were already part of the security protocols that were put in place. So maybe, just maybe, this was a standalone plan, regardless if the Prime Minister was going to be here or not. I don't know. So that's the information that I currently have on hand. I appreciate the time, Patrick. Off we go.
In other words, it's not just, it wasn't for the Prime Minister or because of any particular threat. It was something that was protocol put in place.
By the sounds
regardless.
of it.
Thanks, Patty.
No problem.
Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye. Break time. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 4 and take a word to the co-chair external at St. John's Pride. That's Eddie Sincourt. Eddie, you're on the air.
Hi, Patty. Thanks for having me this morning.
No problem.
Awesome. No, Patty, I wanted to call in and talk about a recent announcement that we did this weekend. And we asked, the St. John's Pride Committee asked Palestine Action YYT to be the Grand Marshals for this year's parade after we saw that a lot of our community are made up in the organizers of this movement, and just seeing how much effort they've been doing throughout the year. And we're just really excited to share that with people. And from that, we're also happy that 3 commitments came out of that, and three of them were that we would accept the boycott, divestment, and sanction list that the organization was putting forward, as well as the next 2 things are things we've been hearing for some time from our community, and to make a more inclusive festival for everybody. We've asked enforcement agencies and everybody else to just still come out in March, but just keep the logos at home for the day, because there's a lot of members of the community that have asked for that. And we've also committed to reconcile with marginalized and Indigenous groups in the city. So it's a pretty big weekend for us, and we're just gearing up now for the festival next week.
Let's take it one at a time. So the issue regarding the Palestine Action YYT leading the parade, I mean, your group, you guys and your organisation do as you see fit, but to me it brings an additional layer of politicization of an issue that is already highly politicised, highly emotionally charged. Do you think that there's the potential, even if many of your members are in support of their efforts, do you think that that maybe brings a different layer of political focus that might hamper the actual mandate of your group regarding Pride?
I wouldn't say that it would hamper the actual mandate of our group. In fact, I think there's an intersectionality for our group. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, there are queer people in Palestine and over the Middle East in general that are being targeted by these attacks. And what we're saying is there has to be a better pathway to peace. What we're seeing right now, nobody that I've spoken to has unequivocally said, no, it has to keep going the way that it's going. Everybody, no matter what side of if we want to talk about the politicizing of it, no matter which side of it they're on, everybody agrees that, for the most part of who I've spoken to, people agree that what we're seeing now, there has to be a better pathway to peace. And it's interesting because as soon as we bring up this topic, and a lot of people I've spoken to over the weekend, there's almost this trigger response where people go deep into this. It's really complex. I don't think you understand everything that's going on. And then there's kind of this automatic reaction that comes out of people. And what I've been reminding everybody as part of the discussion is the resolution to what's happening right now is not going to be decided by you and I. There's going to be academics, there's going to be foreign policy experts, ambassadors, everybody else who's studied this far more deeply than you and I ever would.
Yep.
But what we're saying right now is there has to be a better pathway to peace than what we're seeing right now. And if these kinds of fundamental human rights are being attacked, it's only a small step for rights of queer people to come next. And that's kind of where the overlap happens with this organization, with our organization, and it's something that we're seeing with Pride movements across the country. Pride Fredericton just announced the same commitments, and also that their Fredericton Palestine Action Group is going to be leading their parade. And then we saw this weekend in New York and Toronto, because these queer activists didn't feel like their Pride organizations were doing enough to advance the human rights and the progress aspect of the movement, their parades got stopped dead in their tracks on Sunday afternoon. So there is a big, broader conversation that we're seeing throughout the Pride communities across the country, specifically around this topic. And honestly, it just happened that we had seen the work that they were doing, and we reached out locally to say, how would you folks feel about this? Does this work? And then as we kind of had a couple of weeks of conversations about this, we had all agreed, and we were happy about it. And then after the fact, we saw what was happening in bigger cities. So it's one of those things that because we were trying to really connect to our community as much as we can, we're at a bit of a contrast to what we saw in the Toronto Pride Parade.
Let's move on to law enforcement. I mean, we understand the fractured relationship between the queer community and law enforcement. There's decades of documentation regarding how we've arrived at this point. Is there a roadmap to repair the relationship? Because this has been the go-to for Pride parades, to exclude uniformed members of law enforcement, don't even want them on site as part of security or what have you. So is there a roadmap or a need for a roadmap to rebuild the relationship? Because if it continues to be fractured, then of course that's not good for either side. So is there such a roadmap or conversation ongoing, or is this going to be the way it is forevermore?
Well, the hope ultimately is that we can have communities where all facets of our community feel safe. And when it comes to the enforcement piece, one thing that we're told quite regularly when it comes to our community is that there's still work that needs to be done, and that being in the parade with those logos and those insignias and everything else around them makes a lot of our community feel uncomfortable. Now, quantify a lot and all those kinds of things, but when we approached enforcement agencies, they basically said, just tell us what your community wants us to do. And we believe that fundamentally, anybody who's working for any of these agencies, if you really want to send the message home that you're listening to the community and that you're committed to support them and to try and make sure that they feel safe, one of the strongest moves that any member of those forces could make would be to show up to the Pride Parade out of uniform, put your Pride colors on, and march alongside the community in recognition that you're hearing what they're saying, and that you recognize that work still has to be done. Because, I mean, I've heard it. We've had issues where we've brought reports to the RNC, people making different threats towards the community, and despite their attempts, the response that I get back from our RNC is, well, there's no mechanism in the law for us to do anything here. There's nothing we can do. And I always challenge back to enforcement agencies to say, wait now. Don't come back to a community of people who've said, I don't feel safe in my community for these reasons. There's this hate that's targeting up. This is bubbling up to the surface. We've got reports of people being followed. You've got people in Halifax that have been attacked outside of bars because they were outside celebrating their birthday. And then when you hear back from enforcement agencies, while there's no mechanism in the law that allows us to do anything and there's nothing we can do, that's not an acceptable answer. The answer that I want to hear from our enforcement agencies is, we've identified this gap and we're bringing it up the chain. We're bringing it to the Minister of Justice and Public Safety and identifying that there are members of the community that are feeling unsafe, and we can see this pattern. We need to be able to do something here, and that's kind of part of this. We hope that we can keep these conversations going, and it's certainly we don't want to. There's a lot of people within the force that have said, I can be my true self with the force and within my force. That's great. For your experience, that's really great to hear, and that's a part of progress. But there's still more work that needs to be done if people in our community are truly going to feel safe.
That's what I was going to ask is there any worries about members of law enforcement who are indeed queer, who might feel like all of a sudden they're on the wrong side of the equation, or they feel like they're doing something wrong, or they feel like, and I don't know what the right words are here, or they feel like they're betraying other members of the queer community? Because inevitably, whether it be in the military or the RNC or the RCMP, law enforcement across the country, we know full well there are queer members. Do you think you put them in an awkward spot with these types of policies?
I think that we put them in a spot where we're hoping that we encourage them to listen to what the community is saying and not to take it as a personal attack against them, because they're also our members. And we do recognize that there was a time when pride organizations across the country were actively lobbying police agencies to walk in solidarity in the parade, and that was an achievement that happened. Now, largely the people that were pushing for that were majority communities. You're going to be your mostly white people that were pushing that and felt that level of comfortability. But what we've seen since 2015 and 2016, especially with different protests that have happened in Toronto as well as Montreal and New York, is that everybody needs to feel safe in these situations. And what we're really hoping is that anybody that's within the force takes a minute of pause. And also with all these decisions, I mean, we've met a lot of these people. They've seen the work that we've done over the last year, and to kind of take a minute and go, you know what, these people really try and put a lot of thought and effort into what they're doing, and we hope that we present that our heart's in the right place when we're trying to do these things for the community and for the festival. And we really want people to, we're hoping that people hang on to that and take a minute to step back and go, okay, well, what is it that they're saying here? And what can I do in my position to make a safer community for everybody in the queer community, not just a select few.
Eddie, you know as well as I do that some of the pride parades and some of the videos and pictures that have come from them have been problematic. So when you see things like scantily clad or nudity or sexually provocative gestures during these parades, you know full well those are going to be the issues that grab the headlines. Those are going to be the memes that are shared wide and far on social media. What's your perspective on that front? Because that to me seems counterproductive, if not only counterintuitive. What do you think?
It really depends on what you're looking at. Now, we say all the time here in St. John's, we don't really have the weather that brings a lot of those parades and those kinds of floats. But part of the reasons why you see that. But
even if it doesn't happen in this parade, it's the sentiment that carries the day, isn't it? So if it happens in Brazil, then it will be automatically attached to pride parades everywhere, regardless of what has actually happened in St. John's. I think it's when we talk about movement or the way it all fits into culture, those types of things. I know you know what I'm getting at here. So do you think that's been a problem for the community? Because, nudity in front of children alongside a parade route is not helpful. And I think that's really damaged some of the relationships with the pride community and the larger community. What do you think?
I mean, I think that you have to look at where the origin of that kind of demonstration within the Pride parades kind of started. We've got to remember that Pride is a protest, and Pride will always be a protest. And some of the origins of people doing that in Pride parades in bigger cities was because at the time the people being part of our community was being seen as being a social deviant and being outside of that deviance, and things were pushed into the shadows and were pushed underground. And that's kind of where that origin of, no, today I'm going to be me and I'm going to be who I am. You know, if you're going to a big city pride parade, and we know this has been part of pride parades, I mean, for decades. You know what that is, and the march that day is about a march of free expression for people. So parental guidance advised when it comes to going to big pride parades in big cities, and also be prepared to have that conversation. But I don't think that they're doing a damage to the community, because I don't think that those participants actively promote and market themselves as, I'm family friendly. They would be the first ones to tell you, I'm not family friendly, and that's not why I'm marching in the parade.
Do you think that hurts the cause?
I don't think it hurts the cause at all. I think that it opens a discussion, and I think that if these parts of our society and these parts of our community, that society for a long time said that we were deviants or we had to be pushed away or those kinds of things, I think that's all part of the discussion. And if I could boil down a pride parade or a pride march into one sentence, I would, but I'm a year at it now. And there's a lot of different intersectionalities in the community. There's a lot of different opinions about what people think the movement's about and what the movement should try and achieve. And what we try and do is find where those Venn diagrams overlap and make that our focus for what we're trying to do. And that's really to push progress forward for all members of our society so that our rights aren't being attacked every time we turn around.
Any worry with the inclusion of the Palestine Action YOIT, what it might mean for queer Jews?
Well, we have reached out to, we have some more meetings coming up with people who are that are from the Jewish community, because we want, and we put this on our website clear as well. This isn't we're not making this step as an anti-Semitic move. What we're saying is, and what I said at the start is what we're seeing now. There has to be a better pathway to peace, and how that's going to be decided, that's going to be other people on the other side of the world. But we want everybody to come out and march in the parade in solidarity that there are human rights that are being attacked right now, and getting in and overstepping those rights is not the way to a peaceful resolution. And we're really hoping that resonates with the community, and we're going to keep doing what we've been doing for the last couple of weeks and reaching out to different organizations that we feel might be impacted, and having that discussion and welcoming that discussion. And hopefully we can all learn something from those discussions. And I think that people shouldn't be afraid to have these discussions and find where their beliefs overlap, and kind of unify around that common good of, we can't advocate for progress in society if the people that we're advocating for have all been killed.
Eddie, I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for the call.
Awesome. Thank you, Patty.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. That's Eddie St. Clair. He's the co-chair external St. John's Pride. Very quickly before we get to this break, excellent point made by a listener regarding Patrick's concerns about the snipers on the rooftops during the Memorial Day celebrations. Remember, Princess Anne was supposed to be here. So maybe, just maybe, the security protocols also included the presence of representatives of the monarchy. So that's a good point. That may indeed have played an active role in that decision. Let's take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. I'm not sure what David would like me to do here. Just take whichever one of these I'd like, Dave. All right, line number one, you got it. Let's go. Line number one, Dave, you're on the air.
Whoop, caught me off guard. I didn't know you were ready for I. How are you this morning, Patty?
I'm doing okay, Dave. How about you?
Well, not too bad, boy.
And of course, I should
Enjoying your show as usual.
I appreciate that. I should say that it's Dave Callahan on the line. He's one of the three candidates vying for the presidency of the FFAW.
Yes, and I'm kind of calling in this morning something that really has to do with that capacity and that initiative, I guess. I'd like to state that up front. But it's to draw a comparison, and your show has been a testimonial to that, to what I'm alluding to this morning in grand fashion, about how basically everything circles back some way to politics. This morning we're hearing tell of how they're trying to make politics out of the repatriation of our unknown soldier returning home. Is that a Newfoundland who wasn't part of Canada issue at the time? Canadian flag is draped on the funeral, all this type of thing. Doesn't matter. At the time, I guess, basically, when they were fighting for Newfoundland, we were kind of fighting for the world. At that time, it wasn't just, specific to our special needs or or interests. But it sure seems that politics likes to follow and make it that way. Now, the issue that I'm alluding to is one of the most irresponsible things that I've seen any government do. It's one of the most foolish things that I've seen our own premier stand up and applaud or agree to, and to basically make politics out of that, because now they're claiming we have an end to our moratorium, when nothing could be further from the truth. It sends an ugly message to the rest of the world. Come on in, boys, let's get the foreign draggers in here and go right at her. There's no longer a stewardship or a protective fishery or an exploratory fishery or sentinel fishery, whatever you want to call it. They just put the term commercial fishery, which opens up a whole new variety of issues for that resource. But now the problem with all of that is I'm not going to be really easy on the word that I'm going to use. We got an idiot minister federally as far as anything is concerned. This person, Le Boutelier, or whatever her name is, the Minister of Fisheries, who is a social worker by trade and probably a very good one, now serving a role with the federal government that she should be nowhere near. Now, there's a few lefties out there going to say, well, boy, I mean, how can you say that? I mean, why can't she serve the role? I mean, she don't need to be a scientist. She's got experts around her.
But what does lefty-righty have to do with whoever the minister is?
Well, they'll try to keep me politically correct, I guess, in what I'm saying, and that probably all-inclusive. She should have the right to be the federal minister. No, she shouldn't. No, she should not. She just chose to totally go in the opposite direction of the experts in her department, of the science supporting the decisions that are supposed to be made involving everything from cod to species below it. I just heard a press release yesterday. The FFAW come out and had this beautiful release about going to fight back now on this and whatever. Not once throughout the press release did I hear tell of the name, even the mention of seals. Seals are the identified largest problem that we have with the recovery of cod stocks, which also then affects the recovery of many other things as well. It works in a line. So we've got this issue with seals. Nobody chose to recognize that in this rant that they went on and the big display that went on about how they're going to fight and hold demonstrations and do petitions. Why don't you use their own science against them? Why don't put this somewhere and actually take this to a federal court if you got to? This is absolutely ridiculous. We got somebody now making decisions that have no authority, no educational background, no experience, circumventing the work of an entire department.
I'm curious about the seal issue, because the press conference was pretty much not about the strength of the stock and the recovery model. It was simply about the decision and the technical term of commercial versus stewardship.
Yep.
So, I mean, I don't think there's been any lack of reference to the problem that are seals off our coast, whether it be from...
Where have you seen it, Patty?
Sure, there was just a SEAL summit here. We just had a release coming out of the Senate about a SEAL strategy.
Summit, but what did that yield? That's another spot to eat triangle sandwiches and get one of them big boxes of Tim's and sit down and nothing gets done.
I mean, people have been complaining about SEALs for decades.
The chief scientist in our government, Daniel Ricard, he's mirroring on a report that was done 5 years ago that said not only is the extinction of this species possible, it's now probable. Given the issues that are not being faced, the federal government, once our stocks reach the limit reference point that they're at, they're supposed to trigger the next mechanism, and it's a fiduciary responsibility of our federal government, which they've failed since this moratorium has come in, which they just failed and spit in the face of again yesterday. Our stocks are considered to be in dire condition. They just increased the total allowable catch from 13,000 to about 18,000 tons. What they did was open the door for offshore trawlers, offshore draggers, to come in here and start going back at our resource again. It's not even out of where the LRP says it should be between critical and cautious. It's almost always into the critical zone, and it has been since 92. Actually before, because that's what triggered the moratorium in the first place. Now we got a situation where a federal minister by the way, is a social worker, and that does matter, is serving in this role. Okay, if it didn't, and she chose to listen to her experts, she chose to listen to the science, then I guess you could say arguably that, there's nothing wrong with her serving in that role. She's just proven that she's playing God. And our provincial premier, our provincial minister of fisheries, have done nothing to stand out and scream other than the fact that they're gone now from deeming this a stewardship to which is only a term. It's like core versus non-core. It's just foolishness.
No, boy, it's not. It's a technical term that triggers all kinds of stuff. I mean, they could expand the stewardship fishery and not include any expansion for offshore draggers, not include and trigger any NAFO regulations, which sees 5% flow. So it actually does matter. Like everything else, words matter. If you move
it really does.
Yeah, so, you mentioned sentinel fishery versus stewardship. Sentinels basically more about science and indices about the strength of stock. Stewardship has very strict regulations, and those things, for the most part, go by the wayside with commercial. So I would suggest that the first word in what fishery we're talking about is the be-all and end-all, because it has everything to do with the allocations and the inclusion of the offshore and international fishing. So
changes the whole water on the beach.
It does. It really, truly does. We're almost too late for the news here, Dave, but I'll give you the final thoughts before we have to go.
Well, here's what I'm basically leading up to, and it's got nothing to do with my own candidacy and winning this election. Believe me, that's not what this call is about. Because even if I do win or I don't, I'm still going to be all over this because it's just vehemently wrong. But if there's any way possible that you're going to allow boats out there, bigger boats, offshore fleet, it should be Newfoundland boats. Until we pass 115,000 in total allowable catch, this was not even supposed to have been considered anything less than an inshore and Newfoundland fishery, not foreign boats. If we're going to allow the bigger boats out there, they should be Newfoundland and Labrador boats, not anybody else. Not basically opening up to be calling the moratorium over. When the moratorium wasn't on, we were doing 300,000 metric tons a year. Now they're calling it an open and commercial fishery on 18,000 tons and allowing outside involvement in that fishery. It's a complete spit in this industry's face, which I don't think that the FFAW nor government is putting forward a strong enough position right now that sends the message. And the message that should be sent beyond this province's borders is this: Newfoundland and Labrador fishery will no longer be a bartering tool for the federal government. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Appreciate the time, Dave. Thanks for the call.
Thank you, Patty.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Quick check-in with Dave. How are we doing on the telephone out there, David? All right, let's take a break for the news. Don't go away.
Your voice in Newfoundland and Labrador's biggest conversation.
If you want to know what's happening in your province, tune in to Openline every day.
Have your say weekday morning starting at 9 a.m. on Openline with Patty Daly on your VOCM.
Welcome back to the program. Let's go. Line number one. Mike, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Morning to you.
Patty, what's going on here with this Marine Department is totally and utterly ridiculous. And the Premier won't step in to do anything because he's afraid that he might make his buddy look bad. And the department there, they know that...
Who's his buddy? Sorry?
Corey Grandy, the Deputy Minister of the Marine Department.
Okay.
They got unqualified people and that stuff there. And everybody knows that all the industry, you can't get anybody with any worse reputation than this department and anywhere in the world with regards to the reputation, everything, and what's going on, the waste of money and everything else. Just to give you one instance here now. They just wrote a contract for the veteran and then the Legionnaire of $5 million. They set up the contract so that one person was going to get it, one company. Now they went at it cost $5 million. That project could have been done for $1 million. I could have done that job there, made $1 million, saved them $1 million, got the jobs done on time, and threw in the repairs and 2 generators for the Flanders free. for that same money. What they're doing is blatant. They're trying to blame the PCs there now for all this money having to be spent, which is, I can't deny that the PCs, never wasted money.
No, but I mean, the reference there is pretty clear. The then Tory government made the decision to buy those ferries and have them built in the damaged shipyards. I mean, that's just factual stuff. That's
right. And there's also factual stuff now that this government, when the PCs tried to make it better by firing John Baker, the assistant deputy minister, the Liberal government goes and hires him right back. And he is one of the biggest wastes of money that ever created from back 20 years ago. This man has cost this province hundreds of millions of dollars in repairs and mismanagement of the system. Everybody knows that it's mismanagement that is the cause of all this stuff. The reason why the veteran is there now is all because of mismanagement by this department. But the Premier there now, the Premier knows about it. I spoke to the Premier. Premier put me on to Fred Hutton. But apparently Fred is not as good as buddies with the Premier as Corey Grandy. And he can't get anything done. But this whole ferry system there now, it needs to be overhauled desperately. And if not, like I said, it's going to continue going. This one thing there now that's ongoing. Look, all this money is costing helicopters, charter for all their boats and that and everything else. The boats out of service. All of this could have been avoided if we had management there who knew what they were doing and could do a refit and knew how to do a refit. None of these got the marine experience to run this department. And until that happens, we're going to continue to just pour millions and millions of more. And the Liberals are just as bad as the PCs ever were. I don't know about worse because it's blatant there now. Everybody in the industry, all the contractors outside, the suppliers and everybody else knows what's going on. But nobody's allowed to say anything because of their vengeance of going back at them that they'll destroy them. They won't give them the business. They'll ostracize them and just ruin it. And they're there on a power-hungry trip. And anybody says anything outside, we'll get you and do everything to them. The crews are there. The people who knows the work, knows what got to be done, they're not listening to their own employees. They're only listening to this clique that's into Confederation building, that knows nothing, don't know how to do their jobs, and they're at the top of the totem pole, and the Premier is not a Premier, a leader. He might be Premier, but he's not a leader. Because if he had any kind of leadership in that and whatever, he wouldn't worry about his friends and that or anything else. If they're doing wrong, they're doing wrong.
What leads you to believe they're friends? Like, what's that based on?
Just from what everybody is telling me, that him and Corey Grandy are personal friends outside they were beforehand. I don't know from...
sometimes I think we should be wary of what everybody's saying.
Yeah, well, that's true, too. Maybe they're not, but...
I have no idea.
You'll give the Premier the opportunity to come on and deny it if it's not true. I don't think you've got any problem doing that. I don't mind apologizing. If I make the wrong statement or whatever, I don't mind admitting that if I'm at fault, I'm at fault. But I know in this here, look, I spent 50 years doing those ferries. That fire would not have happened on the Flanders if I had been there. I can guarantee you that now. Because that is a blatant...
Why do you say that, though? Like, I'm not even exactly sure what happened to cause the fire. Are you?
Well, I saw the pictures of it and stuff, whatever, and the generator burnt completely, which should never have happened. I've seen a lot of those failures and that stuff on those generators. None as bad as what this was. The generator was totally destroyed. Now, warnings and that and everything else should have went off all before this. If the safety equipment and that stuff was working, no way. After this boat just coming off a refit, there's big errors on the refit. I can guarantee you that. I put those generators in there. I sold it to them. I know all this total system. Go ahead.
If there was a problem with the refit itself, would that not be the folks who did the refit versus the Marine Department?
No, they're not allowed to do anything other than what that the Marine Department says. And they're not qualified to do it. And I worked at that dock there. I've been working there. Well, I started my apprenticeship there, as a matter of fact, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, or whatever. And I know people in that down there. I know what's going on. And everything down there, and they're not allowed to turn their hand for anything other than they say. So, matter of fact, what the government tried to do to get the boats out of the dry dock, even though people said Paul Handel is there or whatever, They even looked at bringing the boats to the mainland for refits and that and stuff. And it was denied. They couldn't do it because the boats weren't classed to go across the Gulf. They're only allowed to go a certain distance from the island. So they've tried everything there to get work out of Newfoundland, not to help this province. And they're trying, and from what, like I said, I don't know for sure or whatever, but all indicators is that they're trying to drive the people from the islands. They're trying to make the service so damn bad that, look, we can't live here, we can't handle this and that and whatever, and to get the people off the island. It's a way of their underhandedness. I don't care if they're trying to drive the people off the island, but come out and say so, not to make their lives miserable and everything else beforehand. If they want to take the boats, the ferries off and get rid of it, the provincial government, say so. Just don't do it and lie and connive and blame other people and that and stuff for their mistakes. You know, as far as I'm concerned, look, for anybody who knows anything about the marine industry, these ferries and that, whatever, he made a fool of himself by saying and trying to blame it on the PCs. So look, you don't look good because somebody else does something wrong. That's not an attribute to you.
Yeah, and the thing about emptying out the islands and what have you, I think with the vast majority of seats that are outside the Northeast Avalon, that would be a political miscalculation. Because if that was really what people say the same thing about doctors, right? Is that they're not going to try to get me a doctor. But when people need a service, whether it be healthcare, ferries, or whatever, when it's not provided, that's a knock on them, politically speaking. That hurts them at the ballot box. So I never really quite understand that argument, because it's making it worse for them. Because there's a victory to be had. If the ferry service was more reliable, there's a victory there. If the healthcare and access to healthcare was improved, especially in rural, there's a win there. So I'm never really sure the argument about they're willfully trying to hurt themselves politically.
Well, you look at the last two by-elections, Fred Hutton got in Liberal. I know the people on Bill Island, I know the people on the committee, I know the mayor, I know them all. And I've been talking to them all, and I keep in contact with them all. They basically voted Liberal to get on the Premier's side of it instead of being in opposition, hoping that they were going to get a bigger service, a better service. Well, Fred Hutton is held ransom. Fred can't do nothing. They're begging Fred what Fred said that Fred was going to do to get elected. They realize now that, look, whatever political side you're on, you're not getting anywhere with this. And then the PCs went in down Fogo Island. So what exactly is going on there and how it turns or whatever is that the people don't know who to go for because they're not getting the service. So whoever they go with the opposition or with the party that's in power. So it is a difficult question for those people of how to elect and whatever. They can only hope that they're going to get somebody in there to give them the help. Now, to me, I got nothing personally to gain from this or anything else. I'm looking at it from pure perspective. If they want to get rid of the ferries, as far as I'm concerned, do it, but be honest with it. Don't go creating these hardships and everything else and whatever. But right now, there's not only deception, conning the people, the minister and the premier. Well, it's into a state there now of disrepair, this department, and everybody knows it. That look, they're not efficient. They don't know how to do their jobs. They're incompetent. What's in there? And I'll back it up. I'll debate it with them. I'll debate the issues with them. I'll debate all the money, the millions of dollars that I know is wasted. I can count hundreds of millions of dollars wasted because of decisions by these people that they don't care about the money. The money comes separate. They're power hungry. And as long as they got the power there that you do what I says and that whatever, if you don't do it, you're ostracized.
Mike, I appreciate the call. I got to get to the break.
Yeah. All right, one of these times, Paddy, I'd like to talk to you about there's a couple of topics there regarding the Mi'kmaq property. And I own some property there that was owned by the Mi'kmaq. And I also own a wharf and that stuff, like similar to the Quad of Ireland down there, that I'm doing up and dealing with all the hassles of all of this stuff with Mi'kmaq land and these wharf situations and that. But another time.
We'll take it on next time. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. All right, and inside that, I mean, we've been told by the department that the repair bills on just the veteran and the Legionnaire, since we put them in our waters, is around $21 million, and more yet to come. Engines are going to have to be replaced within a year. Something doesn't really feel normal or sound normal about that. People who I know that know much more about it than I do, that are in that industry, say that it's absolutely abnormal. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and take a break. Today's a good day to get on the program if you're so inclined. If you're in and around town, 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, it's toll-free long distance, 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 8626. We're taking a break and then we're coming back. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3. Good morning, Rick. You're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy. How are you?
Great today, thanks. How about you?
Not too bad. Paddy, the reason I'm phoning in today is about section of road between St. George's and Stevo Crossing, called a small town, Barshall Brook. Last year, the contract was awarded to pave that section of road, Paddy, because it was in really, really horrible shape. So it never got done last year because apparently the company that was awarded the contract never had time to do it. So this year they're supposed to pave it, Paddy, and it's supposed to be done in June. Here's July, it's not done yet. And I think they had subbed out some of the ditch work, Paddy, culvert and ditch work earlier this year to another company. And it was just horrible what they've done, Paddy, because whoever was operating the excavator doing the ditching done a horrible job. A 10-year-old on an excavator could have done a better job than what he did. So, Paddy, that's one of my concerns.
So just paint the picture. How bad is the work and what makes it bad?
Well, Paddy, water is pooling in the ditches now, which it never ever did. It's not set up the right way to drain. And also, Paddy, there's a section of the road with at least close to 500 feet long that should have been dug up back then when they done the ditching and blast rock or whatever, or heavy rock put in because there's a boggy spot there, Paddy. And what's going to happen now, they're going to come in and just tear up that asphalt and just recap over this. And within 2 to 3 years, we're going to be back to the same scenario we got now, a cow path.
Is this stretch of road anywhere close by Barshwa Pond Provincial Park?
No, Paddy, Barshwa Provincial Park is up on the Trans-Canada Highway.
Yeah, just outside of Stephenville.
Yeah. And, Paddy, this little town between St. George's and Stephenville Crossing, like, say, if you leave St. George's, you got to pass through Barshall Brook and then through Stephenville Crossing to get to Stephenville.
Okay.
And, Paddy, they never started paving it yet, but somebody needs to come out and look at this, Paddy, because it's absolutely ridiculous. I worked in road construction before for a couple of years. And to see what they done there, like I said, Paddy, a 10-year-old could have done better on an excavator than what they done there.
Well, by the sounds of it, someone's going to have to go behind that first operator and repair it.
Yes, Paddy, and not only that, Paddy, that section of road I was telling you about, Paddy, that's the worst section of road there that's going through this area, through the small town of Barshall Brook. It should be dug up and blast rock put in and proper culvert put in there for the drainage because there's a lot of bog there, Paddy, underneath. And what's going to happen, they're going to come in here and just strip the asphalt off of it and repave it again, and within 2 to 3 years we're going back to the same scenario.
Well, that's been the case many times, hasn't it? You know, if you don't do the prep work for the bed properly, then of course you're going to have pavement that fractures and pits and cracks very, very quickly after it's been laid down. So between that and the thickness of the pavement and the chemical compound, you know, the government has applauded themselves for spending all this money on road work, but it doesn't seem like we're getting very much time out of the roads before they're busted up.
Well, Paddy, we had a contractor in here last year. Another paving company came here and done a kilometre road here in St. George's, and they've done a beautiful, beautiful job, Paddy. They ditched it. They put the culverts in. It was awesome. Everybody around town was so happy and so pleased. And to see this other company coming in to do the other section of road between the two communities, and what's happening, Paddy, if you came out here and looked at it, you shake your head and say, oh, you're right, Rick, you know, it had to be a 10-year-old guy on this excavator.
Well, I mean, every time we get a road work call, some of the times I've actually been on those roads, like for instance, Buddy last week called about the roads out around St. Bride's, and they're deplorable. And so if we've done shoddy work leading up to the road repair regarding ditching, then we're just setting ourselves up for disaster and spending more money unnecessarily.
Well, this is like I'm saying, Paddy, you know what I mean? Like, once you do it once, it'll be good for another 20 or 25 years, Paddy. But this is going to be, 3 years away, and this road is going to be heaving and stretching and pulling when the frost comes. And, you know, the Minister of Transportation should send somebody out here that got some experience and look at this, you know, like, and say, yes, boy, you know, this is ridiculous. You know, that's like saying the previous caller, spend it, like, the government spends money, but they're not accountable for it, Paddy. And then you're going to go back and re-spend money, you know. Like, do the damn job right the first time, and we'll have no problems.
Yeah, well, doing the job right is a pretty good motto. No doubt about that.
You know, Petty, I'm no engineer, but I'm a retired person now, and I've been around the block, Petty. And like I said before, there's time for somebody like an ombudsman or somebody hired by the government to go over and check over these jobs and make sure things are, pushed under the rug, and then, that's okay, that's done now.
Well, I know the inspections are done. Whether or not they're done properly or on time is another question.
Yeah, that's right, Petty, but somebody needs to come out and take a hard look at this before they start laying the asphalt, Petty, because this is absolutely mockery.
Let's see if I can get some information as to the timing for the pavement. What kind of length of stretch of road are we talking about here that they're going to repave or resurface?
There's about 1.5 kilometers, probably 2 kilometers, Petty, or probably something like that. But, Petty, like I'm saying, it was supposed to be paved last year. But the contractor was in Labrador doing work. They never had time to come to it. And they told everybody that it would be done here in June. Here's July. It's nothing done yet. And this should have been dug up early this spring. And the rock put in, Petty, and settled so that it would be, by the time they put the new asphalt over, it would be half decent settled. Now, Petty, they're going to come in there and everything's going to be all alive. You know what I mean? Usually these things should have been fixed last year. Let the frost do the heaving, pushing, and have it all settled in for next year, Patty, so you do an awesome job.
Fair enough, Rick. I appreciate the time. Anything else before I go to the news?
Okay, thank you for your time, Patty. Appreciate it.
Appreciate
Have a great day.
Keep me in the loop.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, there you go. Yeah, I mean, of course, we've heard that this year's roadwork season would see an unprecedented amount of money spent. And off the top of my head, I think it was around $230 million. In years past, much more in the neighborhood of $85 or $90 million, which, of course, is far less than what we bring in gas tax, which why gas tax was introduced here in the province, is for this exact purpose, for road work, bridge work, culverts, and the like. And I'll throw back out there because we just set a record for rainfall in the city of St. John's, 214 millimetres in the month of June. The previous record was 199, set sometime in the late 1800s, so there's that. When we have seen some of the pictures, whether it be from Bay St. George or elsewhere, where the size of the culverts are not keeping up with what seems to be, quite clearly, more frequent and more severe storms and a lot of water. So is it time to identify exactly where these smaller culverts that may not be up to the task, all we have to do is look at some of the storms that have hit in the recent past, should we get out in front of it, as opposed to wait for the flooding to happen and wait for the culverts to be washed away and all the damage and the time and the money cost to repair things after the fact, versus maybe some proactive work on things like culvert replacement? I'll leave that up to you. The topic, nothing's too small, nothing's too big. Whatever you want to talk about, we can do right after this news break. Don't go away.
The Tim Powers Show. Join the conversation weekday afternoons at 4 p.m. on your VOCM.
Welcome back to the program. I had an interesting call earlier. A lady, I believe her name was Sharon, talking about the problems that her and her clients are having with CRA and some of the internal audits and reviews and the length of time it takes to finally get things rectified. Just a warning for the thousands upon thousands, well, I guess an untold number of Canadians who are part of CRA's effort this month, beginning this month, to take legal action to recover some $9 billion in pandemic support monies that went out the door to folks who were ineligible for them. Now, of course, there is an opportunity for people to challenge this in federal court, albeit with a significant price tag. But, there's some onus on the government here. Initially, when people were applying for employment insurance, immediately put on the CERB. That's not what they wanted. It's not what they applied for. Then there was concern of small business owners about whether or not they were technically eligible for the CERB. So there was some confusion, and some monies went out the door. And now, inevitably, there were people that knew full well they weren't eligible that applied for and got a variety of different supports. And so they're going to see some of that money come back, whether it be with garnishing your wages or some other legal action. Here's a breakdown inside some of that $9+ billion. Okay, $9.53 billion to be paid back. $5.41 billion from the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. That was the big one, right? The CERB. Then there was $2.67 billion from the Canada Recovery Benefit and $1.25 billion from the Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit. The warning here is pretty clear. So if you're someone who has not responded to CRA, they've sent you messages, sent you letters saying that your account has been identified as someone who was technically ineligible for one of the aforementioned supports. If you don't respond, you're almost guaranteeing legal action. For some folks who have owed government money on this particular front, the concept of offsetting. So if you were eligible to get a tax return this year, but you owed government money, they kept your tax return or whatever portion to cover your debt. So the advice that came through someone who I know in the legal community regarding this particular issue, heard me talking about it whatever day it was. I guess it had to be yesterday. Is that if you respond, you can open up the conversation, maybe even set up an opportunity for a payment or repayment schedule, as opposed to wait for the inevitable and they come after you with some legal threats and or start to garnish your wages. So that's the worst case scenario I would suggest for people who know full well that they've been identified. So whether it be folks who have not responded or you have responded and you've been deemed financially able to repay the money, it's going to start getting clawed back. Now, I've said this in the past and some people don't like it, and it's about, getting a pound of flesh. For instance, here in this province, the decision has been made to claw back from folks who are on social assistance because they technically were not eligible for that money. The CERB was pretty clear. If you lost hours and or your job because of pandemic restrictions that were by and large imposed by the provincial governments across the country, then they're going to claw back the money at the tune of something like 5% per annum. Consequently, we know full well, and I think we exaggerate the numbers of people in the province that are actually on social assistance. It's around 28,000 people, and I don't know how many of those got the CERB, but in some situations, we're making bad things worse. People who are already mightily struggling are now going to see even less money coming in the door. Not so sure that makes a whole lot of sense. What would also be interesting to know, and we'll never get this number, whether it be from the provincial government and or the federal government, is, and it's not going to cost $9 billion to try to recover $9 billion, but you wonder what the price tag is. Because this is an additional layer of bureaucracy. I would imagine there's going to be more and more people shifting their focus from their regular duties to be involved in this recovery effort. So you wonder what they forecast the eventual cost to be on that front. But that's just a pretty fundamental warning that came from a member of the legal community, asked me to try to put that out over the airwaves. Just do your level best to just respond, and to acknowledge the fact that they are coming after you, and maybe you can avoid any legal concerns down the road. And I guess this is quasi-related to legal matters, is the RNC has now finalised or officially expanded their jurisdiction on the province's west coast. We know there has been a lot of vacancies inside the RCMP, and there's even national conversations about what the mandate of the RCMP needs to look like in the future. But with the vacancies, with the lack of police presence, the RNC, there was some additional money in the most recent budget for this expansion and the hiring of more officers. I think the number was 10. So here's the communities that they're now going to be responsible for: Cox's Cove, Gillams, Humber Arms South, Hughesbrook, Irishtown Summerside, Lark Harbour, Little Rapids, McIvers, Meadows, Pasadena, Steadybrook and York Harbour. So if you have an active file with the RCMP, you will continue to work with the RCMP until you're told otherwise, but those communities will now see the RNC as the law enforcement agency in their towns. We've heard issues regarding, the lack of police presence, whether it be with controlling excessive speeding on the province's highways and byways. And of course, on that file, nothing slows you down quite like a police cruiser. But here's some of the most recent issues regarding excessive speeding, impaired driving. It's absolute madness. So 2 p.m. on Saturday afternoon, a driver clocked going 192 kilometres on the TCH near Bellevue. So the 22-year-old driver, ticketed for excessive speeding, license suspended, vehicle impounded. 192 kilometres an hour. You've got to be a NASCAR driver to actually have any real control of your vehicle going at that breakneck pace. And then there was another one, 18-year-old, failed a breath test and was arrested for appear in court after he was caught going 139 kilometres an hour. So there's some decision-making for you. Right around Middle Gull Pond, drunk behind the wheel, decides to absolutely pin the loud pedal going 139 kilometres an hour. Then there was an issue, and people need to be reminded of this all the time, and which is why police cruisers don't park directly behind vehicles. They kind of lean into the road a little bit. Why? Because officers come perilously close to getting clipped by vehicles that are going down the road. So that was an instance that happened just a couple of days ago as well, where a cop was just about struck when they were conducting a roadside pullover. So there's a couple of ones for you. And also, you see that the NDP and the PCs in particular really leaning in on this issue regarding the unclaimed bodies that were out in the alleyway behind the Health Sciences Centre, now have been relocated into the underground parking garage. And like the NDP release that I saw at the corner of my eye when I was scrolling social media, is that this really does have a feeling of out of sight, out of mind. So the issue there is sort of a strange one. Like, I don't know if it's a new thing where there's been numbers of unclaimed bodies. We know the cost of funeral services has increased, and the two benefits available are not adding up to full cost coverage. So the $2,338 of provincial money, the CPP death benefit of $2,500. And again, just for some reminders about just how much money the province has spent for these additional morgue spaces is significant money. And for where I sit, it certainly sounds like a lot more money than it would cost to actually come up with some sort of arrangement with the local funeral homes to deal with the unclaimed bodies. Plain and simple. So if they're talking about a dignified place for them to be, I don't know if an underground parking garage actually constitutes dignified, but here's some monies for your consideration. So the day after the CBC reported it, which was on the 6th of March, on March the 7th, NL Health Services purchased a morgue carrier hydraulic roller valued at $10,282.79, as well as a morgue rack lift for $96,604.24. Following that, they ordered a morgue cover frame for $29,558.12, another morgue rack roller for $83,000. So when you add all that up into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know full well that will cover the burial or cremation of a lot of dead bodies or a lot of corpses, as opposed to store them in these morgue units, and it used to be reefer freezers out behind the Health Sciences Centre. So both political parties in opposition leaning in on that one, because it is undignified and it is concerning. So you think you could probably do a lot better with government policy and government money if they didn't add morgue space, but they added opportunities for direct relationships with the funeral homes. The thought has been that some people have applied for these death benefit monies and have still gone on to not claim the body. So that's an obvious problem. So if there was a direct relationship with the funeral homes, that would no longer be part of the equation. Sometimes we overthink things, and so maybe, just maybe, there's a way to change the way we approach that particular topic. All right, let's take our final break of the morning. When we come back, still plenty of time for you to talk about whatever's on your mind. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 4. Sean, you're on the air.
Oh, thanks very much, Patty, for getting me on. Patty, I just wanted to say a few words about the ferry service, and this is probably just beating it well to death. But it was interesting this morning to hear a gentleman who sounded like he had done a lot of work on ferries and had a lot of local experience. And I'll just start by saying he alluded to the fact that they were trying to get people to move inland from the various places that had ferry service because of the schmas that the ferries are generally in. And I'm wondering, are they trying to do the same thing, moving us to the mainland? Patty, it seems like every year, and I know I'm repeating this, like there's just a disaster with our ferry services that goes to the mainland. And the latest is, and of course we heard Daryl Mercer on, well, he's probably been on several times, so last week I heard him and I was going to phone in. But he's describing this problem with this new Chinese ferry that came right across the ocean, whichever way it went. And now we have problems with the fuel lines. And he's alluding to the fact that they're cleaning up the problem and then the problem reoccurs. And he also, the other big statement he made somehow is that this hasn't affected the engines. And I really can't understand and have a fair bit of experience with diesels. If this has gotten into the system, how it hasn't affected the engines in some way. But the bigger thing with it is fuel and oil that diesels need are all filtered. Like, these are massive engines, but they have massive filtration systems. And the idea of the filtration system is to ensure that stuff that shouldn't be in the fuel doesn't get in the fuel. So I fail to see, even if it's, 1,000 gallons of oil and other things, how there's not a method to do this and how something is reoccurring. And, this just goes on and on, Patty. A buddy of mine just came back from the mainland, bought a big RV down the States and had some troubles with it, so he couldn't take his original crossing. And took him 9 days to get another ferry over to here. And, this just goes on. And he said he was talking to people all over the place because within those 8 days he did a lot of camping over there and enjoyed himself while he couldn't make it. And just countless people, as we all know, aren't coming because it's just not reliable, and people are worried, they can't get a passage over, but then when you get over here, who knows how long you're going to be here. And Patty, this must have a detrimental effect on all the tourism people and the restaurants and all this stuff when this stuff just seems to happen every year.
Yeah, that said, Sean, a couple of things. I'm not even entirely sure what's wrong with the Alasunu ferry. I mean, you hear reference to the lubrication system. Someone tells me there's an engine gone, and I've heard a lot of different issues, but I'm not exactly sure what's wrong with it. And even with the unreliability that you speak to, whether it be mechanical issues and or weather and the inability to get a berth, those types of things, they're still selling huge numbers of tickets for passage. Like last year, I think was amongst the record-breaking, certainly well beyond pre-pandemic levels. So I guess people are still using it because I guess because you can't get a rental car by and large, that people are choosing to come across on Marine Atlantic with their own vehicle. But I hear you. There's still big issues with Marine Atlantic from where I sit.
But Paddy, the issues are even beyond that.
Fair enough.
I will say I did a passage 2 years ago across from the Argentia over to the obviously Sydney, and it was on the Blue Petit, and I think I already said this. It was just unbelievably fabulous. The food on it was like 5-star gourmet. Now switch over to the Port of Bass ferry, and I don't know if that's an old age home they got running across or what, but the service is like decrepit. The last time I went across, the boat was 3 hours late. They didn't extend the restaurant service. They closed at the same time, which, like, let's say 9:30, 10 o'clock. Nobody had time to eat. And then everything was closed up again. And it just seems like we don't recognize the value of this, the importance to this to our economy. And just to compare, I usually do a motorcycle trip in the Maritimes in August, and we're booked on the Argentia ferry, and I doubt that's going to happen. But you go over on the ferry, Woody Island, the ferry that's out of Pick to PEI, and the service you have, and the consciousness of service, and the follow-up of service, and the ease of booking and people dealing with you is just 5-star the whole way. But you go over to Port of Basque, and you're in no man's land, and even how you get in there, there's this wicket there that doesn't tell you why you should be there. And if you're booked, you can actually just go right around that, which I do. And then you get to the next wicket, which actually gets you in the lineup. And everybody's lining up in this first wicket, and only to be told when you get to the wicket, oh, no, you got your ticket, you can go on. But that's just fraught through the whole system. It's just something's got to be done with it. But what I will say is, if they're saying that this is an oil and gas issue, Paddy, this hypothesis only is a cover-up for something much, much more major going on with that particular boat. This engine oil issue, and how did this thing manage to sail 3 parts around the world with maybe no issues? And now all of a sudden we get it here, and we're discovering these issues that are only related to fuel and oil. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Fair enough. And I mean, there's still an indeterminate amount of time that it's going to remain off the run. They don't even know when the additional sea trials are going to start. There's some vague reference to maybe the 10th of July. And you mentioned the losses suffered by the hospitality sector. I've had 2 different tourism operators since that news release from Marine Atlantic saying they're losing even more of their bookings. Some of the bookings they've lost already because of rental car related matters. Now they're saying because of this ferry issue, they've lost bookings already. And the question being asked is, if we talk about compensation for disrupted passenger travel, what about business? And it's a fair question. Yeah. And I'm going to say to them, don't hold your breath, but that is absolutely a legitimate question.
And to the restaurateurs downtown and all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's just like, I don't know what's got to be done with this. Privatization, I think, is one thing, because this has just gone on long enough that, how difficult it is. And really you get on this, and it's like, a lot of times it's like, oh, shit, you're here. You're a passenger, right? That's the feeling you get when you go across in Port of Bass. It's just like you're here, right? And I got to say, I know you can talk about this for time immemorial, but it's just, I don't know if we're ever going to get fixed. This is like so many other things in Newfoundland. We're studying this. We're trying to develop ways. We're researching this. We have committees together, and really nothing changes. It's just incredible. But I can't guarantee it, but highly hypothesize there is something major wrong, and until they figure out how to expose or have to expose what really is wrong, we're going to carry on with this oil and gasoline or diesel oil issue. But there's something not right.
I hope your hypothesis is wrong, because that's the last thing we need.
Well, we just had the other boat, which was the one that caught fire after the gentleman that was on an hour or so ago said that the boat just came out of refit, and now one of the generators burnt up. And I don't even know how a generator burns up in an engine room, which should have all kinds of fire suppression systems and other things in it. It's like there's something wrong, something fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, and that boat, the Flanders, we're told it's not even going to be back on the water till 2025, or back on the run. I guess it'll be in the water at some point. But Sean, I appreciate.
I'll end on that one, Petty. The other thing I'll touch on, and I know you're running out of time, is that I can't believe as well we have shut down the main artery into our city yet again, trying to fix that blessed bridge down there. I mean, I don't know if it's annual, but it's certainly a biannual event. And they just redid all these lights going on at the Parkway for some reason, or the Outer Ring, or whatever that's called. And now they got 4-lane highway, and you can't figure out how to run 2 lanes on 4 lanes, and nobody working at night, nobody working on the weekends. This is the major artery to our city. Like, it's just insanity.
So you're talking about Pitts Memorial, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And I mean, who does that? The main artery in your city, you just shut it down for whatever period of time. But more importantly, like, again, why couldn't you have had 2-way traffic, something to get people in? Because if you go out to Kilbride there, and I measured it the other day, 3.5-kilometer lineup trying to get through a set of lights that doesn't appear to have been reprogrammed or anything, or they don't have a person there from one of these high-vis companies to get the traffic through as fast as they can. It's just lunacy. Like how we do this sort of stuff, and it's it's just another thing, just like the ferry service. But anyway, I'll leave it at that.
I appreciate the time, Sean. Thanks for the call.
Have a great one.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, good show, and we will indeed pick up this conversation again tomorrow morning right here on VOCM and Big Land FM's Open Line. On behalf of the producer, David Williams, I'm your host, Paddy Daly. Have yourself a safe, fun, happy day. We'll talk in the morning. Bye-bye.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you want to get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No